Ex parte communications. Anybody? Mr. Donahue?
Well, let me think about this here. Well, about the study session for transportation projects, I've been involved in getting free design work for one of the proposed projects, and this free design work from landscape architect graduate students is available right out of this door here. So I have there are 3 different designs for one of the transportation projects, so I've had input, I guess you could say, from these designers on what could be one of our design concept for one future transportation item.
Thank you. Member Martinez.
Nothing to report.
Vice Mayor Medina.
Nothing to report.
Member Pats.
Nothing to report.
I had a conversation with a representative of Wareham Development on Sunday via telephone, and I have received communications from members of the public, all of those related to item 6.1. Public comment for items not on this agenda. Seeing and hearing none. The study session. Susan Shea, Revenue Generation Strategies for 2018.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
As an opener to the special study session on revenue, the city's long-term financial forecast had revealed that expenditures are expected to outpace revenue growth in the long run. To ensure financial resources are available to support vital city services in the future, the City Council commissioned a revenue study to identify viable revenue options and appointed a revenue task force consisting of Mayor Bowders and Councilmember Martinez. In July this year, the city engaged NBS for this study, and NBS has coordinated a team to address this effort. Our consultants will present the results this evening. I will ask each one of them to introduce themselves, but we have a senior consultant from NBS, a vice president from EMC, who will present poll results, and we also have a partner from TBWB to present recommendations and election timelines. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam City Manager. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. My name is Adina McCargo. I'm with NBS, and what we did for the city was go ahead and pull together a lot of different resources, some that you have been working on for a couple of years, between some fiscal impact studies that NBS did previously, a debt capacity report that K&N Public Finance put together for you, and then with the input from Councilmember Martinez and Mayor Bowders and city staff, we also looked at some additional revenue items, potential tax measures, just making sure that we captured the most comprehensive list of options for the city. So obviously the budget forecast is that we're going to have a disparity between revenues and deficits over the next few years, and it's going to grow. And so obviously there's a need for additional revenue sources, since the existing streams aren't going to keep up with those cost growths. So in the memo that we put together, there's quite a few different specific options, but the Revenue Task Force kind of narrowed those options down to 4 basic areas that they wanted to get the input from the voters in Emeryville here. And that was an affordable housing bond, the cannabis tax, a parcel tax, and a parking tax measure. So of those, the affordable housing bond would be a general obligation bond measure, and we're looking at a potential $60 million bond for that. With the debt capacity report, that still leaves Emeryville way lower than a lot of their neighbors in terms of their effective tax rates, and is something that would be sufficient for the projects that the city needs over the next few years. the cannabis tax. We would be looking at an ordinance that would, if passed, tax up to 10% of the gross receipts, estimated at bringing in about $500,000 a year. The parcel tax, we looked at a few different structures. They're outlined in the memo initially, but the decision to kind of pursue the question with the voters was to go with a per square foot parcel tax. This would be similar to the school district structuring, and that's something that the voters are familiar with. It's something that they would be able to easily see their impact on, and so therefore it would be something that's very familiar with them when they're asked that question. It would include a 2.5% annual inflator with a cap of 12 years, so the voters would be asked again after 12 years if they would approve it. So it's not an in perpetuity situation. They get to see an end date to this and be able to, be asked again in 12 years. Initially, it would start off at about $2.6 million annually for the city in revenue if it were approved. And then the last option was a parking tax. This would tax about $50 per parking space for all the commercial off-street parking within the city of Emeryville, with the exception of the first 25 spaces per site being free. And based on the city's current parking capacity, that would bring in about an estimated $950,000 annually. So that's all I have for my presentation, but EMC is going to go ahead and present what those 4 questions looked like to the voters and how they felt about the city of Emeryville as a whole.
Thank you, Adina.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. I'm Emily Goodman with EMC Research. We're a local or neighbor, I guess. We're an Oakland public opinion research firm. We've been polling in and around the Bay Area for 30 plus years. And we've actually done some of your research in the past. And so where we can, we're actually going to compare some results to past data. So we conducted, right after Thanksgiving, a telephone and email to web voter hybrid survey. We looked at likely voters for next year. We have 291 total interviews. The margin of error on that is about plus or minus 5.5, a little bit over percentage points. And where we can, as I mentioned, we compare these to previous results and studies that we've done for you over the years, most recently in May of 2014, and a couple of these were for the school district as well. A few key findings before we get into the data. We see that voters continue to feel really happy about living in Emeryville. They are prioritizing basic city services like safety, transportation, parks, street and infrastructure items, and they're open to raising taxes to fund these priorities. As Adina mentioned, we tested a set of measures, and we do see that the measures that we tested are viable, but kind of when they go and all of that should be considered, and Charles from TBWB will elaborate on that part. Whoop. Did I do something? I must have. There we go.
I think you're the first person to do that on your own.
All right, I'll take it. So this is a sort of warm-up question that we always ask almost every time that we do a voter survey. Do you feel that things in Emeryville are generally going in the right direction, or do you think that things are pretty seriously off on the wrong track? We see that voters in Emeryville are very happy. 70% of them say that the city is headed in the right direction. Only 16% are off on the wrong track. And these are really strong and positive numbers because I've mentioned we've done a lot of polling in and around the area, and so voters in Emeryville are really happy. A few specific ratings on the city. The scale was excellent, good, only, fair, or poor. This is the first page. We have a second page where we ask kind of a variety of things. The quality of fire services, really positive, 34%, excellent, 48% only, fair, or good rather. Overall quality of life in Emeryville, the quality of police services, quality of city services in general, and then bike and pedestrian safety. The blue obviously is the positive rating, the red is the negative, and so we have a lot of positive ratings about the city. Continuing on, support for the artist community, we see positive ratings, the availability of parking, we see some of the red start to creep in there a little bit, with voters having a little bit more negative ratings there. Management of the city budget, pretty positive. The 33% in the middle, that gray, that's just people that don't know enough about the fiscal management to rate it one way or the other. And then traffic and congestion, it's hard to rate that positively, but we do see some people are actually positive about traffic in the area, 32% positive, and then we see 67% rate the city's traffic and congestion negatively. So moving into the measures that we tested, and we'll show you the language that we actually tested, and you have it in your packets, but we tested 4 measures. This is just a quick overview of the yes and the no vote. So for the parcel tax, 66% total yes. That includes voters who were undecided, and we said, well, which way do you lean toward voting yes or voting no? And so the little sliver of the light blue indicates those who lean toward voting yes. So total of 66% yes for the parcel tax, 30% no. For an affordable housing bond, 74% yes, 23% no. And the vote threshold for the parcel tax and the housing bond is 2/3, a supermajority. The cannabis tax, very strong support, 83% yes, 14% no. And then the parking tax, 65% yes and 33% no. So we'll look at the parcel tax first. I won't read what's in the gray box. It essentially covers what Adina mentioned, but we did indicate kind of where the money could potentially go to protect the safety of Emeryville residents, supporting local youth, et cetera. So we see that support for the parcel tax kind of sits right at the 2/3 threshold needed for passage. Moving to the housing bond, we used language that has been tested and actually passed successfully in recent communities, including Alameda County and Santa Clara County in November of last year. So we sort of pulled language from there to test here, and we see that voters are strongly supportive of a housing bond, at $60 million housing bond, 74% yes, 23% no. So now the cannabis tax, shall the city levy an ongoing cannabis business tax of up to 10% of gross receipts, 83% total yes, 14% no, and with a threshold of 50%, this is, really positive. Now the parking tax, we see at 65% total yes, and 33% no, and only 1% undecided. So after we asked about those 4 measures, we provided some additional information, starting with some things that the funds that were generated from those measures could help pay for. So there are actually a few slides on these, but we see that voters care about a lot of things. Protecting the safety of Emeryville residents, we're showing the 7 and the 6s for a total importance of 86. So the scale was 1 to 7, where 1 is not at all important, and a 7 is very important. So 86% of voters find protecting the safety of Emeryville residents to be an important priority. Maintaining the Emory Go-Round service, 83%. Support quality public schools, 81%. Maintaining police, fire, and emergency services, 83%. Maintaining open space and parks. Maintaining sewers and storm drains. Providing supportive housing for people experiencing homelessness. All very strong priorities. A continuation here, providing affordable local housing for vulnerable populations, 58%. Maintaining the Childhood Development Center, repairing potholes, preventing displacement of vulnerable populations. Again, we see that voters are prioritizing a lot of things that, that the city does and supports. Last page here, supporting library services, streets and roads, and expanding after-school programs. providing services to local artists, 34%. But again, this doesn't include, those who said that they don't know, so they might not really have an opinion on the matter. So some additional information. This was, again, a 1 to 7 scale, where 1 is a very convincing reason to support, the package of measures or the 4 measures that we read. So we see that there's a lot of, potentially positive communications on the topic. So hardworking people should be able to live in a safe, decent, affordable home. This is related to the affordable housing bond. 73% of voters found that to be convincing. The cannabis legislation coming to California next year, or cannabis legalization is coming, whether we like it or not. We need to ensure that Emeryville gets its fair share, 70%. These measures impose necessary taxes on corporations, 70%. Would create a guaranteed source of local funding for our city, 72%. The measures would help services or provide services that make Emeryville a great place to live, 73%. So we see, there's not really a big difference statistically in terms of the level of compellingness that voters see here, but they're all very convincing messages. So a continuation of this, Emeryville residents enjoy the benefits of our clean, safe, and well-maintained city, 73% convincing. The housing measure will build safe and affordable apartments for Emeryville residents, 64%. These measures include a low-income exemption so that those who cannot afford to pay don't have to, 60%. Again, another measure about the housing bond where we actually gave respondents the cost per $100,000 of assessed value. So even when we bring up the cost to homeowners, 60% still find that to be a convincing message as a reason to support the measure. The city carefully planned this package to ensure that the city meets its needs and maintains essential city services, 62%. Found that to be convincing. So we see that support, this is for the parcel tax, solidifies a little bit just above the 2/3 threshold after some additional information, 68% total yes, 31% no. Then the housing bond, 74% yes, 25% no. I'll just mention that, since we've done a lot of polling on this issue, and we have a lot of recent examples, that 75-word statement that voters are seeing in that box is pretty strong because, that's what we've seen has worked in other places. In case you're wondering, why there wasn't a big jump after that, that's part of the reason. The cannabis tax, again, this is sort of solidified a little bit, but the support was already so strong. It only had so much higher to get, so 85%. And then now the parking tax also solidified a little bit after additional information, with 66% of voters voting yes after additional information, 33% voting no. We did read a potential opposition paragraph, essentially an anti-tax message. This is for new taxes. And we saw that 55% of voters saw this to be a compelling message as a reason to oppose the potential measures. So we see that the parcel tax with the potential opposition message takes a little bit of a hit at 56%, total yes, 41% no. The housing bond kind of stays above the 2/3 threshold at 69%. And then we just wanted to point out sort of the vote progression of the housing bond among the subset of likely June voters as you consider timing. We see that support begins at 69%, and it sort of stays there after additional information. And then after that potential opposition paragraph, support doesn't really erode. It stays right at the threshold at 66%. So the cannabis tax, the anti-tax message, doesn't really do much to erode support here either, 81% total yes. And then the parking tax, a little bit of a drop at 62% total yes, 37% no. So next we have Charles from TBWB to kind of talk about next steps.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you.
Hi, Charles.
Good evening. I'm Charles Heath. I'm a partner with TBWB Strategies. We are strategy and communication consultants that work with public agencies up and down the state to help plan and prepare for successful revenue measures. So our job is to work in tandem with your financial advisors from NBS and your public opinion researchers from EMC to try to figure out how we take this data and package it into a potentially successful proposal going forward. The good news as we review your data and compare it to similar results that we see in lots of communities is that you have 4 potentially viable revenue proposals here. I think that the question is, how do you package and sequence these proposals to make sure that you maximize support for each and make sure that voters are well informed and understand the proposals as you go forward. So, and the key to think about too is that the different types of revenue vehicles that we're talking about here have different rules attached in terms of the threshold that's required for approval, but also the limitations on when you can take these different types of proposals to the ballot. So we also need to think through that when we're thinking about sequencing. For example, the housing bond and the parcel tax are both special taxes, meaning they require a 2/3 vote, but they also have more flexibility in terms of when you can put those measures on the ballot. They can be in regularly scheduled primary and general elections. They can also be placed on the ballot in special elections. The way we tested the cannabis and parking tax proposals, they were tested as general taxes, which can be passed at a simple majority vote, but they can only be placed on the ballot at the same time as your council election. So that is more limited in terms of the timing opportunities, and we would primarily be focused on the November 2018 or 2020 election opportunities. So as we've evaluated the data and thought through some different paths forward, and these are ideas at this point to share with the council and to get your feedback, one of the measures that we saw strong support for, and frankly it's consistent as Emily has said, we've seen in similar polling and ballot measures in recent years in a number of different Bay Area communities. In 2016, San Mateo County, Santa Clara County, and Alameda County all passed similar affordable housing bond measures with support levels similar to what we saw in your polling here. Obviously, the affordability crisis and the issues of chronic homelessness are something that Bay Area voters are very aware of, and clearly your voters here in Emeryville are as well. So we think that there's an immediate opportunity here if you chose to move forward quickly by placing the affordable housing bond measure on the ballot in June of this year. It requires a 2/3 vote, but based on the support levels we're seeing, we think that's potentially viable, and you have the flexibility based on election dates to put it on the ballot in that primary election. Now there would be, as I'm going to talk through in a minute, there's a narrow window of time available to you to craft that measure and begin the outreach and engagement with the community to make sure folks understand what you're proposing to do and why it's important, and that would need to occur quickly here to be prepared to take that measure to the ballot in June. Now, if we're able to achieve an affordable housing bond, what we haven't accomplished is making a dent in the revenue challenge that the city has overall. So if you look at the revenue estimates that Adina presented earlier, the parcel tax is the option that generates the most significant revenue and really makes some progress towards achieving that goal. So what we would recommend is that as you look ahead beyond the June election, potentially to the November ballot, to evaluate the potential for putting the parcel tax measure on that ballot, and likely pairing that with the cannabis tax proposal that we're seeing very strong support for here in the community, well above the simple majority threshold required for that measure. Again, that's consistent with what we're seeing in support for cannabis taxes around the Bay Area. Regardless of people's feelings about the legalization of marijuana, the logic of taxing it and benefiting with local proceeds seems to sort of span political ideology and other potential divisions. So that's a potential package of measures that you could take to the ballot in November. Obviously, there's a lot of time that's going to transpire between now and November, and if you did do an affordable housing bond in June, we would want to check back in with some additional opinion research following the June election to confirm that we're headed in the right direction with this November package and drill a little deeper into specifics related to the tax rate that you might put on the ballot, the duration, the specific scope of programs and services that parcel tax might fund. And based on Oakland's experience with Measure Y and Measure ZZ, which you may be familiar with, it's violence prevention funding in the city of Oakland. It's a combination parcel and parking tax, so there may be an opportunity there, and again, this is just food for thought, to potentially combine a couple of the revenue generation mechanisms that we're talking about here into a single proposal, but there's obviously a lot of work to be done to think that through. So if you do want to move forward with one or more of these measures that we think are viable, the next step in the process is really to begin a public outreach and consensus building process, right? Right now we're sort of in the testing the waters phase, where we wanted to see, you know, before we invest a lot of time and effort in pursuing these measures, do we think there's sufficient community support to justify that? And for some of these proposals, we definitely think there is that level of support. Others are more marginal, right? And we need to continue investigating those. But while the city cannot advocate for the passage of a ballot measure, you can educate and inform the electorate as to what your budget needs are, what your affordable housing needs are, and how some of these proposals might specifically address those needs. So we would recommend moving forward, particularly if you're considering placing that housing bond on the ballot in June, with quickly implementing an outreach program focused primarily on the affordable housing issue that voters would be considering first, but also taking the opportunity to set the broader context for your voters about the budget challenges that you're likely to face. So then, you know, you're starting the process of educating people about a revenue proposal that might be coming to them in the November ballot or beyond. The way we typically approach those outreach efforts is by looking at the community in terms of a few key audiences. First of all, there's the internal audience within the city's organization. So you have the council, you have commissions, you have staff, you have employee associations that, as this proposal becomes a topic of conversation in the community, they're going to be asked questions. We need to make sure that they're educated and informed about what you're proposing to do so that they can accurately answer those questions in an on-message fashion. And then once we feel confident that the internal organization understands how to talk knowledgeably about this, we start fanning out into the broader community with other elected leaders, neighborhood leaders, business leaders, and ultimately the voters at large to make sure they've heard the key messaging so they're educated and informed about what you're proposing to do. In particular, we would also want to look specifically at some of the key stakeholder groups, you know, some of the larger taxpayers in the community that would be impacted by these measures, and make sure they've had an opportunity to provide feedback and their perspective as we're helping to shape these proposals before they ultimately go to the ballot. The other piece of this is actually building the measures for the ballot. So, for example, if we're looking at an affordable housing bond for the June ballot, we need to build the resolution that will come back to the council that will specify specifically how the proceeds from that bond measure can be spent. Is it exclusively affordable housing, or are there other priorities that you would want to blend into that as well? What's the tax rate? You know, what is that legal language that the voters are going to consider? What's the overall bond amount that they're approving? Work with your legal counsel to draft all of that, and then ultimately bring it back to you for consideration and a vote. Once that's on the ballot, proponents of the measure have an opportunity to submit an argument in favor. Opponents can submit an argument against, and they can rebut each other's arguments. That's something that we can help with as well, to craft all of that information through the process of qualifying for the ballot. And then if we were looking to put measures on the November ballot, that same process would unfold just with a later deadline. So looking at these timelines, you know, we've been working since August to conduct this initial feasibility study, to be back here tonight to make some recommendations to you as to how to move forward. If we're moving forward to place a measure on the June ballot, then we have a deadline of March 9th. That's 88 days prior to the June election. That's the statutory deadline by which the council has to act to adopt a resolution calling for that election. So realistically, we have until your February 20th or March 6th council meetings to do some of the outreach that I just described, develop the specific proposal, and bring that back to you for adoption. Then you would place that on the ballot, and there would be a period of time, roughly 3 months before the June election, where an advocacy campaign could occur to argue for the passage of that. And again, during that phase, public resources cannot be used to advocate for the passage of the measure, but leaders within the community can step forward to form an independent advocacy campaign committee and run a campaign in favor of the measure, which typically, when you need a 2/3 vote, that type of advocacy is required in order to ensure the passage of the measure. And then fast forwarding to the November timeline, assuming we've placed that measure on the June ballot, the June 5th election occurs. Immediately after that, in order to stay on track to have this subsequent election in November, I think we would want to do some tracking research during the month of June to look at what impact did that June election have on your prospects of passing a subsequent proposal, and again also to refine and fine-tune what proposal we might put on the November ballot. We would be facing an August 10th deadline in that instance to qualify those measures on the ballot. So looking at your council calendar for the summer, looks like you have meetings July 10th and 24th that we would focus as a deadline to bring to you that proposal for the November ballot based on the research that would be conducted after the November election. And then similarly, that advocacy campaign period would unfold between August and November of 2018. So I know that's a lot of information with a lot of options, but we figured we would share with you our thinking and ask you to engage in the conversation here about how we move forward.
Thank you, Charles.
Sure.
Before we move to the public comment, do members have clarifying questions for Adina, Emily, or Charles that you'd like to ask now as opposed to later? Councilmember Martinez first.
For Emily, if you wouldn't mind taking us back to the slide with how the Emeryville voters are feeling about whether we're on track or not. And I know you said that we're doing well in this regard, but can you tell us something about surrounding jurisdictions, other cities, and what might be an average score in this regard?
Sure. Thinking about, I guess, about,
You don't have to
data.
name
Stuff that I can share. Yeah, I would say generally in some of your neighboring cities, the right direction, wrong track is closer to 50, 45, or 50. So 70's a lot higher than that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I think same for kind of the state in general. We've seen kind of the low 50s for statewide polling recently, so you're well above that.
Thank you very much.
Sure thing.
Vice Mayor Medina.
Can you stay right there, Emily? Yeah, I had some questions about the survey. So you said there were 219 respondents via either landline or email to web. What was the breakdown? Were those all landline numbers that you were calling, I'm assuming?
So no, among the folks that we called on the phone, it was a mix of landline and cell phones.
Okay, how did you get that list?
So it's a voter list available from the Secretary of State.
But that's all landlines.
So sometimes yes and no. You can register to vote and actually put your cell phone number, which a lot of
so
people
that
do.
list skews heavily landline, is my understanding. Also, so what percentage of that was phone numbers versus email to web?
Let me see if I have that. I'm not sure that I do, but I could certainly follow up if I don't have it handy. I don't, but I think that I want to say, and obviously I can clarify, follow up, but I want to say it was roughly 50 to 60% email to web versus phone.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
And my final question is, did you collect demographic information on the people you were surveying?
Yes. So we have a lot of demographic information comes from the voter file. So we get everything that's attached to that, including ethnicity, age, party registration, vote history, things like that. Additionally, we ask some demographic information at the end, like, are you a, homeowner or renter, things like that. So the demographics of the respondents in the poll are reflective of the likely voter demographics of your community.
In a June or a November election?
In this case, it was a November, but that's where that one slide that we showed the subset of the June, we kind of pulled out just the likely June voters to look at them separately.
Okay, are you able to email us that demographic breakdown as well?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Member Donahue.
Say the Senate passes the tax bill, or in your history of doing polling, does the perception of the public, from what you showed, it looks like it's remarkably stable in Emeryville. But at any one point in time for your work that you've seen in other cities, do things radically shift depending upon what's in the news?
Not really. Not not in a place like Emeryville. So you saw, as you mentioned, that, support is consistent. I think the best indicator of future support for a potential measure is what's happened in the past. And obviously you have a long history of supporting, potential revenue measures for things that voters care about. And I think that's the same thing here.
I'm sorry, can I just...
Yeah, I just want to make sure, was that the end of your question?
Yeah, it was the end,
Okay,
yes.
go ahead, Diane.
I just wanted to clarify something for my colleague. I had actually asked offline of EMC whether or not the passage of the bill in the Senate had affected any of the polling answers, and I believe because the polling period spanned the time that included when the Senate passed their version of the bill. So I wanted to know if people were thinking negatively about taxes after that time, and the answer I got was there
No.
wasn't any change.
Yeah. So we essentially took, we looked at the date of the interview, so every day, and we looked at kind of before what was happening in the national news and after, and the support for the measures didn't change.
Other members with questions before we take public comment? No? Okay.
I have just one thing. Can you go forward a couple slides? A couple more? Right there. Oop.
Oh.
Yeah, okay. I just want to look at that while people talk.
Oh, sure.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you.
Emily. Okay, at this time, I will call for public comment. Members of the public who wish to speak on this item will be allowed 3 minutes to speak on this item. I don't see a lot of people here. We do have a speaker card. However, if you would like to submit that, I don't have any. I call people who register as a speaker first, and then we open it to anonymous speakers or those who don't wish to declare at the end. So at this time, public comment is open. Anyone wishing to speak on this matter? Mr. Sears, welcome.
Mayor Bowders, council members, Jeff Sears with Wareham Development. We've always been willing to contribute our share, but we count on the city to put that money to good and effective use. In the past, when you and your predecessors looked for added revenues, Wareham's been an active supporter and cheerleader. We did it with Measure A, the school tax. We've done it with the Emeryville round repeated times. We supported the increased development fees that fund lots of money for schools, housing, parks, and transportation. We supported the transfer tax that was passed. We do have serious reservation about this latest effort, really for 3 primary reasons. First, the lack of dialogue that's occurred so far on that, at least one in which we've been able to be engaged. The appearance of inequitable weighting of this basket of taxes to commercial properties. And then thirdly, we're just a little concerned about the stewardship the city would use in spending tax revenues, what they have or what's increased. The KNN report talked about trying to use a basket of sources as a way of raising revenues, and we thought that had some merit. There were things mentioned such as sales tax, hotel tax, and utility user tax that are not even being referenced tonight, so we wonder what happened to the discussion of those as part of a basket of ways to raise money. It does seem that the ones that have been focused on really put the primary burden on commercial owners in the city. The NBS report does point out already that Emeryville raises far more revenue per capita than your peers, and that's mostly revenue that comes from commercial sources. That also means, since your budget is at break even or in the red nominally, that you're spending more per capita for your peers. And again, we don't have any problems with spending as long as that money is spent, in a way that gets value. But we have seen an erosion in city services of late, so we're concerned about sort of that relationship of revenues and expenses and how the money's being put to use. All that being said, we really feel strongly that much more dialogue is needed before any action is taken, and we'd really like to see you tonight recommend to staff that they go and actively engage a much broader group of stakeholders on these issues. I think with dialogue, there's a way that people can support something. We believe you probably need some more revenue, but we'd really like more dialogue before actions start getting taken. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Other speakers? John Sherman, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Bowders and Council. First, I want to thank the people that prepared the materials for this. They were really helpful and understandable. It really basically did a lot of convincing to me. But one of the things, there's a companion piece to raising taxes, and there are a couple companion pieces, and one of them is exploring ways to increase our existing revenue streams from existing rates. For example, what can we do to support our retail and increase sales receipts? Excuse me. And an opportunity that I think of there is providing better transit options to retail destinations and traffic reduction measures. These are things that should be considered, and this is very timely because that's what we'll be talking about next. The second is, Jeff talked about the stewardship. One of the things that I look at is pensions. I remember Ken Bukowski 10 years ago saying the elephant in the room is the pensions and our inability to pay them. One of the things that I'd like to see is that we have, as Jeff said, a dialogue about pensions and where our funding is going to. And it's like, do we have a sustainable pension program going into the future? Certainly we have to fund the obligations that we have today. And then if a parking tax is considered, excuse me, I would really like to see that revenue be used to fund improved transit services. If we want to reduce vehicle miles traveled, which I think is really critical, we need to provide viable options. And one of the options that I'd be looking at for this tax is to fund the citywide AC Transit Easy Pass, also related to something we'll talk about later tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Are there other members of the public who wish to speak on this item? Stephen Keller, welcome.
I'm pretty much going to read from the email that I sent you late last night, just so we make sure it gets out in the public. So good evening, Mayor and council members. I stand before you tonight to ask that you table or postpone these items until we have an opportunity to hear and fully understand my proposal for paid parking. Two seated council members have heard the proposal in detail, but that was many years ago. The mayor received the details of my proposal, but has not heard or discussed the plan in detail with me in person. And two city council members have not received any information on my plan in detail from me personally. Since 2012, I've been asking for one thing: a simple chance as an active citizen to present a realistic and comprehensive program to reduce single occupant vehicles coming into Emeryville, as well as overall vehicle miles traveled. I've asked, but have never been granted an opportunity to fully present my proposal in front of council as an agenda item. Thus the public has never heard this plan or the potential benefits it could provide. Though the principal idea and purpose of my plan is as a congestion management tool, it has the potential to raise a solid source of revenue, much larger than the three proposals you've heard tonight, and without going into debt. The three proposals you've heard, a cannabis tax, a parking tax, and a parcel tax, is estimated to raise just over $4 million. My proposal could generate $10 million annually and would not be a tax on Emeryville residents. Why wouldn't you explore an idea that could generate over twice as much revenue and cost your constituents zero? This is misguided to put a parking tax on the ballot as a source of revenue when the tax should be a way of addressing our concerns for traffic. My plan charges drivers, those who drive into our city, a fee far less than any Bay Area market rate parking fee, while mitigating the amount of single occupant vehicles driving into Emeryville. I ask that you give me the opportunity to present my proposal to the full council in public. This would provide an opportunity to provide review of a more comprehensive congestion management tool, not only as a revenue source, but as a plan to provide incentives to drive less, to provide more public parking without adding any new parking lots or garages, and would eliminate the need to tax residents or homeowners. The report you received from NBS that you're using to make these decisions itself states that Emeryville population is more heavily taxed relative to the level of services delivered. Why would you consider taxing us more before fully exploring better alternatives? I understand the issues that we're dealing with. We need to raise more revenue. But a rush to tax your citizens before fully vetting ideas is just not prudent. Your responsibility as elected officials is to do what is best for all residents. It is your responsibility to make sound and secure financial decisions, and I hope you do so tonight. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Stephen. Other members of the public who wish to speak? Seeing and hearing none, I will close public comment and open this to discussion. I would like to begin with Councilmember Martinez, who was my partner on the ad hoc committee, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you to all of the team who put this presentation together and to staff for leading this process. I think through the survey, we've heard that Emeryville residents are obviously very happy with how the city is running, and we've heard loud and clear about the things that they appreciate in terms of city services. And we've traditionally had a superior level of service when it comes to things like public safety and public works and youth and senior services. And I think that now is we're experiencing some economic stability, but there's, a lot of us feel that it's our turn for an economic downfall. And with the possibility of economic uncertainty ahead, I think it's wise for the council to be planning on safeguards as a bulwark against our unfunded liabilities and other financial pressures that are coming our way. So I'd like to highlight something for the public that's abundantly clear to my colleagues here on council, that studying these revenue strategies came as part and parcel of a very difficult budget process. So when we talk about our city's stewardship of the funds that we're spending, that is something that we take very seriously, and we made just very recently, some very difficult decisions, and we intend to maintain the level of services that our citizens expect, and we are looking ahead to the future to make sure that we can continue to provide those services at superior levels as the people in Emeryville expect. So I want to thank council for allowing me to serve on our task force to evaluate the best course of action. And what you were presented with today was the result of careful consideration, and it's by no means the final step in this process. It is not November yet, it is not June yet. This is the beginning of a public conversation that we invite our businesses, our residents to be part of this conversation. This certainly isn't the beginning of the conversation. We've been talking about revenue strategies since the beginning of the budget process, and I think that's been abundantly clear as well. Let's see. So my recommendations would be, in terms of a cannabis tax, I'd recommend that we would put that tax on a November ballot. I would not assign a specific number as of yet. I'd like for staff to come back with a report in the spring that'll analyze an array of rates. That's something I'd like to see. In terms of the parking tax and the parcel tax, I think we should explore those further. I would be interested in more public discussion. I think that we need further evaluation, and I would love to hear from Commissioner Keller in a public setting. And finally, regarding the housing bond, Mr. Mayor, you've been outspoken on this issue of affordable housing since long before your time here on council, so I would look forward to your advice and guidance on this issue. I hope you're going to make a decision regarding the timing and the scope of a housing bond tonight.
Thank you, Member Donahue.
Well, I just want to say that in general, Emeryville residents actually pay less tax than our surrounding cities in total. Yes, we have more tax paid per capita because we have so much commercial activity in town. But our commercial taxes in aggregate are actually lower than the surrounding cities. So I think the public needs to hear that, but also pretty much of the public already knows that. So I think that we are in a good position to go forward. Yes, we have a shortfall, but we are to what Mr. Keller talked about, looking at taxation and or policies just for income is not how we should be thinking in our city. And I agree with that. I think we need to creatively think about how we can make our city a better place. And I think that's what Mr. Keller's aiming at. And when we think about putting ballot measures on, I think we need to think about that as much as raising funds. We need to think about the future of our city and how it's going to look and feel, and how our residents want to pay for it. You know, it's not just a what will pass and what won't pass decision. So I'm all ears to exploring these ideas further.
Thank you, Member Donahue. Member Pats.
So a couple of things. I want to echo Member Martinez's support of a housing measure. I think that a housing bond is something we desperately need and is money well spent. And I think, talking about timing and things, I think that'll have no problem passing. I do want to explore what Member Keller, Member Keller, I guess, is right.
He's the commissioner.
Thank you. Commissioner Keller had said. One of the things I will say is, if it seems like we're moving quickly this evening, it's because we have timelines, and I'm a big believer that it's easier to stop a ball than to get it rolling in the first place. And so even if we go down a path, we can always change course much easier than we can to get it started late. So have that in mind, and don't be too critical of us. I do want to talk a little bit about the cannabis tax. I agree again with Member Martinez. I just want to say that as staff looks at this, I'd like to keep the number low for a myriad of reasons. You know, nobody ever lost an election proposing a vice tax, but I do think that we are talking about medication here. At least that is how we have packaged it, to make it palatable and to shift gears and add an extra surcharge just because we've allowed recreational use does sort of go against the purpose of why we've decriminalized. And for addressing the commercial burden, I think it's time that we frame the discussion in a way that fits the national narrative. And while I hope the Senate does not take action to pass this tax plan, I'm under the assumption that it's going to. And let's take people at their word. The idea here is that we're releasing the federal burden of taxes so that local governments can have more control. And so while the commercial taxes in Emeryville may go up with these measures, that's okay because the overall federal taxes have gone down. And who better to utilize those funds than the local community? Which brings me to the parcel tax. One of the big things is that I'm big that as we talk about these things, I don't want to supplant what we're already doing with new revenues. I want to make sure that we supplement and continue providing the quality services that we have. And the challenge I had with our most recent budget process is I think of things in pyramids, and the bulk of our costs and expenses are public safety, which pull very high and really get a lot of support. But then when we look to make cuts, we don't start at the bottom of the pyramid. We go right up to the top, to the community services, to the really quality of life issues, and cut there. And so as we proceed with this parcel tax, if we do take it to the voters, I don't want to sell it as a big global, it's going to pay for all of these things and pave your driveway as well, tax, because I find those to be disingenuous. We've passed a few parcel taxes, and we've not been able to deliver on all the things we promise. And so I'd like to be very specific about, you know what, this is going to allow us to maintain the unique services that we have to cut first. So the community services, the child care, the after-school programs, in order to maintain our current level of public safety, and sort of not say, hey, we're going to do all of this stuff. And so I just want to be very thoughtful on that. And as we have these conversations and we get into the language of those things, I will express my vision a little bit more clearly. I was going to mention Prop 98, but I'm going to let it go with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Pats. Vice Mayor Medina.
I'll keep it relatively short. I'd like to echo a lot of the sentiments of my colleagues. I think they're absolutely correct. including especially on the cannabis tax. We are coming in with one of the highest statewide effective tax rates of about 25% already, so I would urge prudence in looking at the numbers there. But I'm open to all of these ideas, and I think they're all really good ones that have been vetted very well by our ad hoc committee. That I would just like to thank them for the amount of work they put into this. This is really an amazing presentation. I've worked on ballot initiatives. I think they are a uniquely fantastic tool for having the community give input to the budgetary process. I love that sort of direct democracy. Three of us up here on this entire side of the table just ran for this office a little over a year ago, and we were talking to a lot of our neighbors. And I think what all three of us heard a lot was concern about the cost of housing. We have a really high percentage of renters here. A lot of people don't see a path towards home ownership in the city. So I think being able to provide affordable housing and being able to provide security from displacement has got to be at the top of our priority list. And even though I normally don't love June elections because I think a lot of people don't turn out who otherwise might, there's an immediacy to the housing issue where I could see potentially a path for this. And I'll like to hear what our mayor has to say on this.
Thank you, Member Medina. And I too want to begin first by, I first want to thank three people. I want to thank Councilmember Martinez. As Councilmember Medina noted, we spent a lot of time in the past year, not just with the consultants we have here today. We spent a lot of time this past year discussing the city's fiscal situation, and for those at home who wonder what council members do, it's the very unsexy, unglamorous work of balancing your budget often. And I want to thank you for all the work you've put in on this with me. I also want to thank the city manager, and I want to thank Susan Shea, because we met far more times than I think most cities probably would have met in the past 12 months to discuss this. I want to respond to a couple of the public comment items that were raised, and then I want to speak to some of the things, just build on a couple of the items my colleagues have mentioned. As to the question about a lack of dialogue or whether we have had an adequate conversation, I would say two things. One, we just did polling. That's what we did. And when you poll, as these fine people will tell you in the time we've spent together, we don't usually solicit input to develop the poll from the people we will poll and the people who may in the end be taxed. We solicit input from people who understand how to really test what is the range of acceptability when you're asking people to consider levying a tax against themselves. And one of the elements of that is you can't ask people to be polled on 10 items. So it is true that we evaluated a list of tax options, measure items, things that could have been polled, and for a variety of reasons we reached the list of 4 that were presented here this evening. Among those reasons, just at a really high level, sales tax is a declining form of revenue. That's not localized just to Emeryville, that's a regional issue. People buy more online, and point of sale is not always located here. So asking residents in this city to pay more when they shop here would result most likely in a number of years in us having to ask people to now pass a different type of tax to make up for that. The same is true for the utility users tax. That is also a declining revenue stream as statutes and ordinances related to utilities are outmoded and outdated to reflect the current types of utility services provided. And so I just wanted to say a couple of those things at a high level, because these were not darts at a board in the dark that we chose. These were economically strategic choices we made in terms of revenue streams we saw likely to weather an economic downturn, be sufficient for the foreseeable future so that we could say with a degree of confidence to residents that we will not continue to have to pass additional forms of new taxes in order to meet services needs. One of my goals as someone who works on the state budget in my full-time job is I do not want to constantly come back with my hat in my hand and ask constituents in this town to fund things from their own pockets. And I think that people lose trust in the civic process if that is the way you roll out initiatives. I appreciate the comments that were made about alternatives and ways to do this in a manner that either builds on existing revenue sources or alleviates residents altogether. I think there are some other challenges to those things. I'm happy to have a public forum to discuss those things more transparently at a longer venue and time. But you know, Economically, our economic engine depends on the synergy between a lot of very intimate parts in a very small and vibrant city. And for example, transient occupancy tax, we aren't really competing with Oakland. No one wants to stay in Oakland right now in a hotel. We have other hoteliers who are looking to build hotels here, and so choosing to up-tax hotels right now might not be advantageous to our long-term fiscal plan. I want to thank the members of the Budget Advisory Committee as well for all the time they put in. And to the comments about that we haven't had a discussion about this, I actually took the time to write every time we've had a meeting about this item this past year. And we had over 25 agenda items about budget and pensions and taxes, and we had 9 budget advisory committees in 2017 and 4 budget governance meetings where we discussed the city's budget, revenues, and expenditures. So we've had a very lengthy discussion about this. By no means is this over. This is the entree into the next level of discussion, and we chose to do this as a city in December, a whole year before any significant set of ballot initiatives would come before people, so that there could be a full, vetted, transparent process. So we hope that those who came tonight and those who are at home or watching this later will engage with us in this conversation. That has always been the mission. On a couple points, I want to point out that our staff really swallowed a couple pills this summer when we asked to make changes to how we delivered services in this city. And so, and this city council took a very important and difficult step in proactively paying down unfunded liabilities on pensions. We made a $4 million payment against unfunded public safety personnel pensions, and we committed almost $9.5 million into a 115 pension trust. I just attended the Alameda County Mayor's Conference this past week, where PERS gave a 2-hour presentation, and I will be very frank, I am surprised the man lived 2 hours in that meeting. But they gave a presentation, and he made it abundantly clear the state will not bail out cities that do not meet their obligations to their pensioners. He mentioned 2 jurisdictions that have already gone bankrupt in the state of California, and those retirees from those jurisdictions receive 58% and 63% of what was promised to them, because that is the status that their public agency left them in. I know all 4 of my colleagues up here, refuse to do that to people who work in this city. We will be proactive in paying down unfunded obligations, in negotiating through difficult times with people to ensure that the health of this city, the services that Councilmember Martinez noted are important to people here, are continued to be provided, but that we also give the staff and people who work in this community a degree of confidence that we have your back. That requires difficult conversations, and that also means we have to talk to residents and businesses at times about what it means to have the types of services we have here. So speaking now, thank you for humoring that slightly long narrative, but speaking now to the actual 4 measures that are before us, I would ask my colleagues to support the following. I endorse Councilmember Martinez's proposal related to the cannabis tax. I think a cannabis tax in the 2018 November election, as it's been seen here in the polls, is completely appropriate, and I think that having a further discussion about the tax rate, to Councilmember Patz's point, I think a diminutive rate is appropriate, but to a degree that we actually do well and do right by this, and we don't squander the opportunity to make a balance between the industry and our needs. As to the parcel tax and the parking tax, those are 2 taxes that I would like to see explored further. This was simply the polling outcome, and I would like us to spend some time in the spring up until June, when it's kind of the deadline for us to take some concrete action. I would like us to do some additional polling in June on a couple of the variants of that that were presented to us, and I would like us to examine and engage the community, residents and businesses alike, about variants and opportunities to work within those tax streams to potentially raise revenue to fund city services for public safety, youth and senior services, and other vital core services. And then finally is the housing bond. And as a couple of my colleagues, I'm grateful to them for noting, housing and homelessness is the #1 reason I ran for office. It's been an area I've worked on for 15 years. I have very intimate experience with homelessness personally and professionally. And the Bay Area is, as Councilmember Pats always reminds us, this is not a crisis. Crises don't go on and on and on like this. This is an epidemic of immense proportions. And I'm very happy that this community solidly supported in the polling by a 3/4 vote that we should do something about this. And so I've thought a little bit about this, and I want to put this on the June ballot. I want to put this on the June ballot. I want to have the city come out and make a statement. We're a small city that needs to be a regional player. We are not going to be the home of a shelter. We don't have the staff, the site, or the services to deliver that. We did a long hearing in October to discuss how we fund that with our partners. But we can provide housing. We need to provide housing to working people, families that work in hourly jobs, families that work in construction, in emergency services, as nurses in hospitals. They deserve to live here too. We need to provide housing for our local artist community. We just passed and agreed upon an economic development strategy where we married the culture of our community to our economic future. I'm very committed to seeing that vision be completed, and I believe that means that we need to build more housing for creative class to live and work in our community. And finally, I believe we need supportive housing for the homeless. If we say we are going to seriously do something about homelessness, we have to do something. And it's not talking about it. We need to take an action, and as a community, it is not a burden for us to do our part and do something to help end homelessness. And housing ends homelessness. And so I support putting together a bond measure for June. I'm hoping that my colleagues will agree to that direction tonight. And in terms of the amount, we had authority to go. We had a lot of cap space, and we do, Mr. Donahue is correct, we do have the lowest tax rate in this region, the lowest tax rate. A lot of people don't realize that. And even with this housing bond, we will be below the median tax rate in this region still. And so I would ask people to look at the value of that. And I recognize that housing is not something, there's a lot of people who are concerned about density and other issues. So I would like to propose a variant, which we could study briefly if we need to, but to move quickly on, which is a $50 million housing bond married with a $10 million parks bond, so that people get community livability, because people will move here for housing, but they will stay here for the community we create. And so that would be my ask tonight, is two bonds, $50 million for housing and $10 million for parks, to be presented to the community as a livability measure that all Emeryville residents can support. And I'm done commenting. Other discussion?
I really support what you just said about an approach of having that predominantly housing, a little bit of park money on the June ballot. I think that's the way to go.
Thank you.
I would support that as well.
Thank you.
I'm in support of this.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. On cannabis, Councilmember Martinez made a proposal for a November ballot and to study the rate further. How do folks feel about that?
Yep.
Yep.
Yes.
Staff, you have unanimous direction on those two items. For the parcel tax and the parking tax, how do members feel?
I'd like to study it further and possibly look at putting it on November, either of those.
Yeah, I want to echo that. I think that if we go for things in June, it's going to be really critical to see how that's going to impact things. So I think we need a little bit more time, and since they have to go on the November, I think we have more time on that, so I definitely want to study it.
Okay.
Yes, study.
Agree.
Okay, so we will continue the discussion with the community about parcel and parking tax and other measures that could still be used, I suppose. And we will ask staff to come back to us with the consultants late spring, so that in June we can have a more thorough public discussion about whether those items belong on the November ballot.
I'm going to take a moment and say it's conversations like this why we hit that 70%.
You know, and I don't want to mean speak any community, so I'm going to leave them anonymous. Councilmember Martinez knows, because she and I caucused on this, but I actually attended a different city's council meeting last night, which is not something most of us would do in our free time. But they were getting a presentation from a consultant on polling for a bond measure of their own, and it is a community that most of us would say people, maybe not everyone up here, but most of us would say people look to and envy, and their presentation showed that there was 57% of people in their city thought they were going in the right direction, and the consultant told them last night, they said, you know, if you get a community that gets over 60%, you know you're doing the right thing. And I kind of smiled sitting in the audience, because A, I was the mole, and B, I was like, all right, we're doing pretty good. And they have a much better financial situation than we do, and they could not get to their voter thresholds on their items, on any of them. And so I share that because I want to thank all the members of the public who participated in this survey online or by phone. I want to thank the residents of this community for their strong support of what we do here and for your willingness to build a better Emeryville. And so with that, I will close this agenda item. All right, item 6.2, we'll now take a study session on the transportation projects and prioritization for potential capital improvement plans, considering ACTC money and SB1 funding opportunities for 2018. And I believe Andrew and friends will be presenting.
Go ahead and pull it up. Good evening.
Yep.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. My name's Andrew Clow, the Director of Public Works, and as the mayor said, yes, I'll be here with some friends. We'll have Ryan here with us, our senior engineer. We'll be talking about transportation projects. Charlie, our community development director, is going to help us out with a little bit. I think Amber is back here somewhere. There she is. Tonight in her incarnation as grants manager. And then Nancy Humphrey is here as well. So with that, we'll get going.
Do you think we have enough staff for this, or?
Excuse me?
Do you think we have like enough staff here, or?
No, it'd be great if they were all here to see what was going on.
Welcome, Andrew. Go ahead.
Thank you. So, as we said, the study session tonight, transportation projects, prioritize potential capital projects, and consider ACTC and SB1 funding opportunities. That's why we're here. Go ahead. And then so quickly to get there, we're going to talk a little bit about the 5-year capital improvement program, review some of the current transportation projects in our work plan, and then discuss potential capital projects and the grant opportunities. And then we'll be asking City Council to provide us with some feedback on those potential transportation projects to see which of these we want to put our efforts into. Maybe we want to put our efforts into all of them, but on what kind of a schedule? Because as much as we'd like to, we really can't do them all of them all at once. It starts with the general plan. The general plan outlines a vision for Emeryville's long-term physical and economic development, community enhancement. And specifically relevant to us tonight is the transportation element. The transportation element seeks to create a well-connected transportation network that accommodates cars, public transit, walking, and biking. All of the city's capital improvement projects need to be consistent with our general plan. When the City Council approved the 5-year capital improvement program about 1.5 years ago, a little less than that, they went about the process, and these are the goals that the council set in developing that plan. And to summarize them real quickly, it's creating a vibrant city with livable with infrastructure that supports that, directing resources to those high priority projects, and increasing the staffing resources to support those CIP projects. I think we're doing 2 out of 3. Part of what the city, what Public Works has also done in taking a look at this is put together, well, here we go, controlling documents. Yep, there's a lot of other documents that go into putting together our programs. We just listed a couple of sample ones here. Pedestrian bicycle plan, sustainable transportation plan, and a series of individual plans in various neighborhoods. Other prioritization factors went into determining which capital projects should be in the plan. All of these were considered. They were not, they were called prioritization factors, but they weren't given a numerical weighting, but they were all considered. It's hoped that when we add additional projects to the capital plan, we'll also consider these prioritization factors. Some of them, if you take a look at preventative maintenance, hazard elimination, mandated programs, many of these that are in our work plan are maybe not that all interesting, but they're critical. They're critical to meeting the goals of the city, to meeting the mission. The projects are essential in some cases for merely maintaining the infrastructure. And as we saw in the very interesting polling that was done earlier, I think the number was 46% of the people polled think that sewers are important. That is until they stop working. Then they become a crisis. And why didn't you fix them? Why didn't you invest in the infrastructure? Why is it failing? And that's what we have to pay attention to, is we can't forget about those critical capital projects. A big part of what we're doing is not really that glamorous, but it's critical to the economic vitality and the livability of the city. And so we can't forget about that kind of maintenance. We want to get there before it's a crisis, certainly before it's an epidemic. Moving on to the quick summary here of our current capital projects. So I'm going to hand it over to Ryan. We're going to move quickly through those, because then we'll get to what we're really here to discuss primarily this evening are the potential capital projects in the future, but we'll certainly be available and answer questions on any part of the capital program. This first one is our #1 capital project right now, and that is to build the South Bayfront pedestrian bicycle bridge. Provides a much needed connection across the railroad tracks in southern Emeryville. We're continuing to work on our agreements. We're getting very close. We have a couple of difficult partners, primarily the railroad. Other than that, we got consultants in place, we got construction management in place, we have our plans and specs done, we're finalizing our pre-qualification. We'd love to be able to bid this out in early January and be in construction in the spring if we get the final agreements in place. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan. He's going to go over some of the other current transportation projects.
All right, so ACTC is working right now and working with all the partner agencies along the San Pablo Avenue corridor. And what they're trying to do is do a multimodal improvement plan for the corridor. And what it will do, it will build off existing transportation and land use planning efforts that have been completed on the corridor. So they're asking the partner cities and agencies in the area what they're working on, what the status of those are. And this is a critical arterial corridor in our area. It provides a key north-south parallel route to I-80. It's multi-purpose in the broadest sense. It goes through diverse neighborhoods, thriving commercial districts, major trip generators, and both well-established and transitioning residential neighborhoods. It serves our local, regional, and interregional trips, and it plays a critical role in the networks of all modes of travel. So we need to really be looking at this on a whole corridor scale. Other projects that we have going are street and sidewalk systems. We're working on rehabilitation and maintenance on these. One project that's under works is the Lumec LED retrofit project. It's 95% done, so if you go around the city, a lot of streets have brand new LED lights on them. And the second stage of that project is actually to paint the poles. The poles are very faded, they're kind of starting to rust. We need to protect those poles and protect our infrastructure. We have another project in the marina to upgrade the lighting in the parking lots and around the pedestrian paths around the Marina Park and on the Powell Street lights coming into the park. We have seal coats that are needed on Powell Street Bridge, Temescal Creek Bridge, and the 40th Street Bridge that are all needed to protect that infrastructure and before it gets too costly to repair that bridge. And then last, we have our big annual street rehabilitation program for 2017, 2018, and 2018 to 2019. So this year in May, we're going to be paving and slurrying about 30% of the city, and we plan in the next fiscal year to do about 10 to 20% of the city. So you're going to see a lot of streets get repaved and reconfigured, and a lot of work being done throughout the city. Another one is our pedestrian and bicycle safety improvements that we're doing around the city. Right now, the transit center is providing a new connection to the pedestrian bridge over the tracks at the Amtrak station. We're working with a consultant right now doing an ADA transition plan, and part of that is that we're going to be creating a sidewalk improvement plan. They're surveying the entire city, looking for trip and falls. They're looking for public facility access for ADA, and going to come up with a plan and game plan for what we need to do to fix, bring us back up to code. Another one is the Emeryville Greenway Park from Stanford to Powell is near completion, should be complete this month. We have bike share stations popping up all over the city. We have 9 on the ground right now, 1 more to go this month, and a few more planned in coming months. Further on the pedestrian and bicycle safety improvements throughout the city, we have a grant for Greenway crossing safety improvements at 65th, 66th, and 67th. It's going to create some raised crosswalks at all these crossings and provide safer travel for bikes and peds going through that section. We have a Class 4 separated bicycle facility on Horton Street that was recently approved by council, and we're excited to put that in and have it as a showcase of how a Class 4 bike facility can work in the city. We're working on the 40th Street Bridge. We're going to be doing the seal coat, and we're going to be paving right up to it on each side of it. So it's a great opportunity to redesign the 40th Street Bridge, and we're planning on doing a full-time transit-only lane across the bridge. We have 2 mid-block crossings that are planned at the moment, one on San Pablo Avenue between 40th Street and MacArthur Adeline intersection, and it serves a lot of the local community right there. There's a senior center that loves to go across the street to pack and save, and we'd like to make that a safe crossing. We have another one on Horton Street that will be privately constructed, and we're working with the developer on wrapping that one up.
That's on your agenda for later this evening.
Yeah. So further, we have what we're calling our transportation corridor management. We have a lot of projects going on in the city, and really Emeryville and the surrounding area has really experienced rapid residential and commercial growth. We're seeing increased traffic volumes and conflicts between all these multiple modes of travel. Traffic volumes are expected to increase as development of vacant and underutilized parcels in the city continue to be filled with these infill developments. To safely accommodate multiple modes of travel and increasing demands on the existing infrastructure, we have to look at this and balance all the needs and plan for the needs of all the users. So to effectively address all these challenges and maximize the use of our limited resources, Public Works is focusing on more effectively coordinating our efforts and thinking in terms of corridor management. So if we listen to one advisory group, we're looking at other advisory groups, how does that affect them, and how does that project affect all these different modes of travel. Staff is seeking additional grant funding to continuously monitor transportation corridors in the field, to collect new multimodal traffic data and implement solutions that can safely respond to additional growth and heightened congestion. And here's a few projects that we're currently working on. We're working with ACTC on the Ashby interchange at the I-80, improving that. There should be some roundabouts going in, a new ped bike bridge attached to that new structure. We're going to be putting in 4 new traffic signals in the next year, one at 62nd and Hollis, one at Powell Doyle, one at 40th and Harlan, one at 45th and Hollis. We have a video detection project going citywide where we're improving bicycle detection at all intersections. We're doing arterial system synchronization where we're trying to make all the signals work in coordination a lot better than they have been with all these new volumes. We're looking at the Powell Christie frontage corridor and a safety study being done by UC Berkeley students next year. And then lastly, we're working with Caltrans on some off-ramp safety improvements at the I-80 off-ramp. So on top of that, we're working on some alternative fuel projects to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. We're working with PG&E to install 10 charging spots at City Hall, and this would be largely at PG&E's cost and responsibility. We're expecting to hear any day about a possible BAAQMD grant to help pay for chargers at Glasshouse Garage, and this would be at our cost with a rebate, but still good for the community, good for everyone. And we're still in the running for funding for chargers, likely DC fast chargers through the VW settlement program. The other aspect of our transportation program is parking and transportation demand management. So we have a citywide parking permit program revisions being worked on and expanding our parking equipment. The North Hollis area variable pricing on-street meters will be put in to reduce negative impact of long-term parking and to increase parking turnover and availability. ACTC awarded grant funds that will be available in July 2018 of $930,000. Additionally, there's a $1.1 million in the CIP allocated for this project, and $270,000 of that 1.1 is matching funds. Parking improvements that you may see are meters, sensors, signage, permits, and mobile apps. So I'll let you take over and talk about some of our funding. Yeah.
Thank you, Ryan. He needs to take a break. He's tired from all that. There's a lot of projects that are underway. The work plan that Public Works has put together, pulling from the existing CIP program, identifies over 65 capital projects they were intending to complete or to have substantially underway within the next 2 fiscal years. We think we can do that. Like I said, some will be substantially underway, meaning these projects all have a lifespan. They come from the vision of the project, you got to plan it, you got to design it, you got to get the contractors, you got to build it, inspect it, and then you got to maintain it. And so all these projects are at different places in their life cycle. So they're moving along, and a lot of those will be completed. Some of them will be in planning stage, and some of them will be in the very early planning stages, but they all fit. The other thing that we're taking a look at is a close look at the private development, and realizing that how important that is, because what's happening with a lot of that is it's public infrastructure being privately constructed. And I think sometimes that hasn't really been fully recognized as an important part of our capital improvement program. What's happening out with Wareham developers are happening down at Public Market, the new parks that we're going to be getting at Sherwin-Williams, the expanded park down at Christie Avenue, and all of these will need to be maintained. Which means I'll be back here mid-year or next year to say, you know what, our maintenance budget has to go up. We're getting these wonderful capital improvements, but we got to maintain that infrastructure as well. So to fund all these projects, as we saw here on this short list, I won't go through it, but these are all the different types of funding sources that go into the transportation capital projects. And that's what we're going to talk about, and hopefully right now, is these potential transportation capital projects and what else should we be working on? What should we be looking at in the future? And the projects we've identified to discuss briefly here tonight are ones that are already in the CIP and are not fully funded, or they're ones that have had community or council-driven projects that have been brought to our attention to say, take a quick look at this, what do you think? And anything else that you come up with and we want to talk about here tonight. But first I'm going to go through these, or actually I'm going to ask Ryan to now, he's had a break, and briefly describe some of these. And in some cases, like this very first one, pedestrian scramble at Paulus Howell intersection, it describes a solution to a problem which we haven't fully studied. So it may not actually be a pedestrian scramble, but that's what Ryan's going to talk about. That might work and it might not, but that's where we are with this one.
All right, so we have a greenway on one side of this intersection and a brand new greenway park on the other one. The logical move would be to put in a diagonal crossing through here. Poses a little bit of problems though. So first of all, pedestrians, they usually have to cross one direction, one roadway, and then cross the other roadway. A pedestrian scramble, for those that don't know, it's a scramble phase and allows pedestrians to cross in all directions, including diagonally. To be able to do so, we're going to have to restrict right turn on red for vehicles, because during the walk phase, you can't have cars making right turns during that time because they could be coming from any angle. Top of that, Powell Street and Hollis Street are defined as transit priority streets. They're also our major emergency corridors. We have on the west end of the city, we have a fire station and a police station, and they often are coming right here on the Powell Street Bridge, right through this intersection to get to different parts of the city. So one thing we got to think about is for the transit and for the emergency vehicles, there could be potential for delay if we have this additional time for PEDs at this intersection. So there are safety benefits to using a pedestrian scramble. However, it's reported to work best when pedestrian volume exceeds 1,200 pedestrians a day. Street widths are 60 feet or less. Our street widths here are about 70 to 80 feet wide. And then also if the through movement is low. So our next potential project to consider is the railroad quiet zones at 65th, 66th, and 67th Streets. So for those that don't know, the FRA, the Federal Railroad Administration, has issued regulations which took effect in 2005 that require a locomotive to sound the horn in advance of all public highway rail crossings. They have to hold it for a minimum of 15 seconds.
Can I just say, Ryan, I think everyone who lives in Emeryville was aware of the...
Yeah.
Because we hear it all night.
Well, if you can still hear and you live in that neighborhood, we hear you.
Yeah. So the minimum on their horns is 90 decibels, and they actually have a new maximum of 110 decibels for your information. The FRA has also provided local communities the option of silencing them by establishing what's called a quiet zone. So in order to create a quiet zone where trains will no longer need to sound their horn, local governments must work in cooperation with the railroad that owns the track, and in our case it's Union Pacific, and they need to work with this appropriate state transportation authority, which is CPUC, to convene a diagnostic team to assess the risk of collision at each grade crossing where they wish to silence the horn. We would want them on all three of our crossings. So an objective determination is made about where and what type of additional safety and engineering improvements are necessary to effectively reduce the risk associated with silencing the horns based on localized conditions such as highway or traffic volumes, train traffic volumes, accident history, and the physical characteristics of the crossing. So potential safety engineering improvements that may be necessary to reduce the risk of collisions at the at-grade crossing would be medians on one or both sides of the tracks, a 4-quadrant gate system that would prevent cars from getting in from any way, pedestrian facilities, that's full sidewalks, full railings, and a full gate system to prevent them to get onto the track too early. When possible, there's 2 trains coming from 2 directions. And then another option is to have a permanent closure of one or more of our crossings to vehicle traffic. So our next one is the pedestrian bicycle bridge over I-80 at Temescal Creek, which is a pet project of Charlie's.
Oh, we get a cameo from Charlie. Welcome.
Thank you. I keep telling Ryan it's Temescal, not Southern California. So I've been asked to chime in on a couple of the pedestrian bicycle projects near and dear to my heart. So this is a proposed bridge over the freeway at Temescal Creek, and there's a couple of concerns about this. First of all, one benefit of it, obviously, is that it would provide connectivity between the Bay Trail and the inland side of the freeway. We also, in the general plan, have an east-west greenway that is not nearly as well fleshed out as the north-south greenway, which, as you know, is almost finished. But the east-west greenway would currently, in the general plan, it just terminates right here. It kind of dead ends at the freeway. And this would get it over the freeway and get it over into the Emeryville Crescent area. The problems with this are, first of all, it's not in the general plan, so it would need to be put in the general plan in order for us to pursue any funding or construction or whatever. The other major problem is that it would be landing in Emeryville Crescent. And I'm going to switch to another map here.
Sure, Steve.
So you'll notice this says draft not adopted. When we were working on the general plan back in the early 2000s, 2004 to 2009, one of the proposals was to have a path along the Emeryville Crescent from Powell Street out to the Bay Bridge. That's here, it's outlined in red. This pretty much had universal support in the city, and there wasn't a lot of discussion of it because it was kind of a foregone conclusion that everybody was behind this idea. So we had some discussion about it, not a whole lot. And I would say that the General Plan Update Steering Committee supported it unanimously. The Planning Commission supported it unanimously. The City Council also supported it unanimously. But when it came to the Council for adoption, all of the advocates for the East Shore State Park came out of the woodwork and vehemently opposed this idea. The problem is that the East Shore State Park, which goes all the way from the Bay Bridge to Richmond, has its own, it's called a general plan. So it has its own general plan, and that general plan says there shall be no access to the Emeryville Crescent. It's a state marine preserve, a designated wildlife preserve, and the only access that's in the Emeryville Crescent area that's permitted by the East Shore State Park General Plan is along the so-called Powell Street uplands here, next to Powell Street, but none along here. So these advocates, when they came to the City Council to argue that this line should be taken off this map, proposed as a compromise or as a concession, shall we say, a policy that would be put in the general plan in lieu of this line. And they threatened to sue us if we didn't do this, of course. So the council reluctantly accepted that compromise, and as a result, the general plan now does not have this line on the map. However, it does have a policy, and the policy says, the city will study in collaboration with stakeholders and interested agencies and parties the feasibility of a pedestrian bicycle trail along the west side of I-80 east of the Emeryville Crescent to provide access from the Bay Trail to the eastern span of the Bay Bridge. So in other words, this trail is to be somewhere west of the freeway and east of the Emeryville Crescent. Well, where is that? It turns out there is a little bit of Caltrans right-of-way that is outside of the freeway corridor, and I think that's technically outside the Emeryville Crescent, or at least outside the state park. So there may be a possibility, although there are some pinch points there. But even to do it in that area, we still, by our own policy, would have to undertake this study with these other interested parties, and those include the California Department of Parks and Recreation, the East Bay Regional Park District, California State Coastal Conservancy, BCDC, Caltrans, Friends of East Shore State Park, Sierra Club, and Audubon Society, and probably also the Bike East Bay, and I'm sure there are other folks who would be interested. So we in the Planning Division of the Community Development Department has actually had this study on our list of things to do ever since the general plan was adopted. It's been in our budget every year as a goal. We haven't been able to get to it because we have other higher priorities we've been working on, and we have very limited staffing. We are tentatively currently have earmarked $100,000 from the General Plan Maintenance Fund to undertake this study in fiscal year 18-19. So we're hoping we can move this along. If we can get this study done and we can get everybody to agree to put this path on the map, then we can put the bridge on the map, and then we can move forward with the bridge. So that's the story on the bridge. The other, whoops, sorry, thanks. The next one is this connection under the freeway at the Maze to connect with Wood Street with Mandela Parkway. Now I'm going to go back to this other map for a second. That doesn't really require a general plan amendment. It's actually off the edge of our general plan map. Just for this is convenient because it's the same map, but not talking about this anymore, talking about this over here. We currently in our general plan have a bike facility, a bike route that would come along Sherwin, down Halleck. You can't really tell here, but it goes on Beach Street and then Wood, and then there's an arrow that basically says go that way. You can also see that this line here is the city boundary. So anything below that is in Oakland. So obviously this would have to be done in coordination with Oakland. The intent of this connection is that it avoids all of the messy traffic here at 40th and Horton and at Mandela and Horton. The official Bay Trail route right now comes along Shell Mound to 40th, down Horton and down Mandela Parkway, which if any of you have ridden that, you know it's kind of dicey. I mean, you can do it, but it's not the most pleasant ride in the world. So the general plan is suggesting that this would be a connection from the Greenway here to the Bay Trail by coming around this way, going under the 40th Street Bridge, then and under the Maze, and then on the local streets down to West Oakland. But it doesn't really say how you get to the Bay Trail. And you can go, if you keep going down Wood Street here, you can cut across at either 34th or 32nd Street. But Wood Street south of this and also those two cross streets are kind of dicey. They're not well paved, they're full of potholes, and they have railroad tracks in them, not to mention a lot of truck traffic. It's not a very pleasant place to ride. So the proposal here would be to build a Class 1 bike path that would be under the Maze somewhere, connecting from behind Target over to Mandela Parkway. And this is all highlighted here because it's unclear just exactly where under the Maze it would be, but somewhere in this vicinity would be a Class 1 bike path to connect Wood Street to Mandela. And I would say in conjunction with this, we would probably also want to do improvements to this part of Wood and Beach and maybe Halleck, all of which is in Oakland. So needless to say, we'd have to coordinate with Oakland on this project.
Charlie, you'd also have to coordinate with Caltrans because it's underneath the freeway, right?
Yeah, that's right. And if there's any other private property owners involved here, we'd have to coordinate with them as well. So that concludes my cameo appearance.
Thanks. Thank you. Appreciate you.
All right, so that's on the south side. We're connecting to Oakland. Now we're looking about connecting to Berkeley on the other side. So we have a project being proposed that's called the Stanford Adeline Shattuck Greenway, and it would create a bicycling and pedestrian and community corridor space extending from downtown Berkeley to the Bay Bridge and along what was the Key Line streetcar alignment. So they're proposing a very wide avenue with activities in the center median, multimodal corridor that connects all the way from downtown Berkeley all the way to the Bay Trail. The one-way segment of Stanford and Avenue in Emeryville is one big major roadblock for this project, at least in the Emeryville city limits. We don't have the right-of-way that you see in Shattuck and Stanford and other areas. Right here in Emeryville, it kind of pinches down. We have parks right there, and then the way we'd have to reconfigure our parks and widen the streets to be able to have the same vision that's the vision for Berkeley as the same vision as what we have in Emeryville. So this project was presented at BPAC committee by Matt Tacker of Tacker Planning and Design and Dave Campbell of Bike East Bay. The BPAC unanimously endorsed the project and recommended that staff seek city council endorsement. And this project is seeking funding and possible student projects to work on planning efforts from UC Berkeley and to do a study of this whole Greenway project as a whole and all the corridor. And another potential transportation project that we're looking at is the Christie Shellmound one-way loop project. I kind of call it the Emeryville spin cycle. But so this project would provide funding for a study to reevaluate the effects of changing traffic lanes at and between Christie Avenue, Shellmound Street, Shellmound Way, and all the intersections to such that all lanes on Shellmound Way and Christie Avenue are one way in the counterclockwise direction. So we have a lot of, if we convert it to one way, we were going to have a lot of cross section. We probably have room to put in other modes of travel through there or some dedicated space to transit in this area. But it does change the whole flow of the city. If someone wants to go just north on Christie Avenue, they have to now go all the way around, and everyone has to go on this loop, and you may have some additional greenhouse gas emissions from people having a further trek around this. Capital costs for implementing such changes would include traffic signal modifications, pavement and sidewalk reconstruction, and roadway resigning and restriping. The next potential project is one from Metropolitan Transportation Commission put out a grant program for innovative deployments to enhance arterials called the IDEA grant. We actually threw our application into this mix. It's a fusion of various technology-focused transportation elements to be deployed throughout the city of Emeryville. So there's a lot of acronyms about to come at you. So there's automated traffic signal performance measures. So it's a way for us to remotely look at our traffic signals to make sure that they're performing how they should be. And with lack of staff, it's a great tool to have to automatically set up alerts when a detector's not working or something like that. We'll also plan on putting on transit signal priority using GPS equipment. It will upgrade our existing transit signal priority infrastructure that we have and improve upon it. And then when you have that GPS infrastructure now in your signals, you could do a cool project like a bicycle signal prioritization using a mobile application. So bicyclists could have a app in their pocket that says that I'm riding in Emeryville, and we may be able to partner with Motivate on this with our bike share stations. And if someone has this application in their pocket, as they come to a signal and it's about to turn red or turn yellow and then red, it will extend the green time for a bicycle coming through. So it's something that we've thrown an application in for. So there's quite a bit of grant opportunities out there, and I'm going to bring Amber up here to talk about those. But when you hear about these other grant opportunities, just think about the projects that we just talked about, those projects to consider for prioritization of which ones we should go for funding for.
Thank you. Hi, Amber.
So the world as your oyster, and then the reality check. So what we know about right now is that Alameda County Transportation Commission is looking at funding in 2018, much like a funding call they did 2 years ago. We received $4.2 million from that call. Some of the projects you heard earlier were funded in that cycle, but also we just get regular money from them. What's known as direct local distribution, that's coming every year. It goes into the paving projects, it does bike and ped programs, but our bike and ped DLD got doubled when Measure BB got funded, so we have about $250,000 right now. And I think that you could interpret that there's probably more coming in each year than there's an annual need for. So that might lead to being able to pool some of those funds towards a capital project. And if I didn't say it, that will be in the fall that we anticipate that they're competitive programs. So it's going in this spring. There should be a discussion of how much money should be available for the call that they put out, and then we should be preparing applications for the fall. So one of the things I anticipate from tonight's discussion is that when I bring you a recommendation of projects, grant amounts, what we're putting into the application in fall, we've taken some of the feedback you've given us tonight to inform that application or set of applications. Additionally, the gas tax has also generated new funds for transportation funding in 2018. And like Alameda County has these local direct distributions. It came in part of the year, so there's only $66,000 in this fiscal year, but we anticipate about $200,000 every year going forward. And in addition to those ongoing money, just like the BB and B funds and VRF, we're also anticipating there'll be competitive grant opportunities. And the one that's coming up fastest that we've been informed of by Alameda County is the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program. And what this is doing is putting money into rail and other forms of trail transportation, goods movement projects, and is new money for quiet zones. And so Alameda County has approached both Berkeley and Emeryville staff and said, we think you're the most ready to go for this money in Alameda County, and we're prepared to give you the 30% match that these funds require. So rather than Emeryville putting in CIP money from our general fund or whatever other sources we can mobilize, they would be prepared to have us do an application with no money in the project, county money and SB1. This would be anticipated to be about a $6 million project, given the development that has come from our original quiet zone study that has now had changes in cost and construction and process. But it is exciting news that they are prepared to provide this match. Things are moving quickly. It's due January 30th. MTC must approve our proposal. ACTC has talked to MTC and heard that they're prepared to do that. We just need to move forward with some of the documents that would allow us to then proceed with the full application. It's a significant application, one of those things, 25 pages, lots of attachments, but we anticipate hearing from you if this is a priority and understanding that you do expect us to come on January 16th, is that your next meeting? That we would bring to you that application at that time. So as we mobilize for that, we'd like to hear where that sits in your priorities. The active transportation program is coming a little later. They haven't yet figured out what money they're putting into that. They're expected to do the call next spring. We've been successful not in securing state funds that are released by this program, but they've been carving off a portion of the funds, and we don't yet know how much that will be, for MTC to distribute. And we were successful. The project on the crossings on the Greenway and those safety improvements were through the ATP program last year. Oh, too fast. And so I started to talk to you about that competitive grant application for the TCEP, the quiet zones, ATP. We would need to know if we had capacity to apply for that. Those are very competitive grants, what priorities would be set for that. And there is an anticipation of using the DLD, or the direct local distributions, in 2018 for mid-block crossing at San Pablo. So one of those other projects that have on your list. I don't know how I did that. But it makes the transition more fun, I suppose. I just want to, okay. So this is the same list you saw a little earlier in the slide, and I've just put a line somewhere in the middle to let you know that on some of these projects, we're already seeking funding, whether that's the Yerba Buena mid-block crossing, where we see DLD available for it. I broke down Ryan's lots of acronyms, and I call it the Automated Traffic Signals and Transit and Bicycle Signal Prioritization Project. That would be the IDEA grant. and then the railroad quiet zone. But then of all the other projects that have been talked about tonight, are they priorities for grant funding? Are they priorities for the other sources of funds that Andrew showed earlier? And I think with that, I hand it over to him with the questions he has before you.
We had been done much earlier without Charlie's cameo, but you know. Important. No, thank you, Charlie. So that's right. We're ready for questions, or whatever you want to discuss, however you want to pursue the discussion of the potential projects.
Great, thank you, Andrew. Before we move it to public comment, start if anyone has clarifying questions. Member Pats, Member Medina,
No,
Martinez, Donahue. Okay, we'll open this to public comment. There's 3 minutes for public comment if you wish to speak. Mr. Sherman.
Thank you. It's really exciting to hear that the quiet zones might be coming through. I totally support that one. Just a general thought on transit projects. When we look at transit projects, and there is certainly a bunch to choose from, I'd like to consider things that do reduce vehicle miles traveled, if we can look at that is in rating of things. And then I have another one to add to the wish list, and this is really for Amber, who seems to be plenty busy as she is, but that is, I would really like to see Emeryville apply for a Caltrans transportation grant. We received one of these before for the eButs study. Amber was instrumental in getting that grant, and I'd like to see this grant used to look at our whole transportation in a holistic way. That includes the Emeryville, the AC Transit bike share, bike pedestrian access to transit, and Uber and Lyft. We've got a bunch of things that kind of don't work together very well, and I think there are opportunities to make our system much more efficient by taking a holistic approach to that. And one of the things to approach in the grant, or the reason for it, is to improve efficiency, explore dedicated right-of-way options, whether that be a red-painted roadway or a streetcar track. It can have a variety of ranges, but I think we need to look at dedicated right-of-ways to make our transit work better in whatever form it takes. Designed to meet performance standards, as an example, setting standards that we want to achieve a direct transit route between Amtrak Station and MacArthur in 12 minutes or less any time of the day. I think that's one of the things that's been missing in our planning. We don't have any really performance targets that we're trying to meet, and we're not meeting our targets or any targets very well. So, and assess our transportation and land use relationships to make sure that we're really putting our focus of transit projects where our density is the highest, and really coupling density and transportation. I think that as a region, that's something that we don't do very well. And then identify transit options that provide the greatest potential for spurring economic development. Transit can be a direct correlation to economic development. So I'd like to see that as part of this grant. So thank you.
Thank you, John. Any other members of the public who wish to speak on this item? Mr. Carpio, Andre, come on up.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Andre Carpio, and I'm old-timer in this town here. I've seen it many change from industrial town to tourist artistic development. I come up with a plan for transportation that is not odd, but is different than what we have now. So far, everything that has been taking place here is increasing the encumbrance of the street. And years ago, I did propose to have a mid-air transportation shuttle. And I did ask you, Mayor Bote, about it, and you referred to me to Ali, but she never answered. I asked 3 times to be able to make a transportation, and I've been ignored. So I'm not taking that as an insult. I'm just taking that maybe you're not prepared to deal with something that is not only new, but not neither revolutionary, but it would increase the efficiency of transportation, because you just can't put so much on the road, and you can just have so much pedestrian and so much bicycle, and the only place that is still available is a mid-air transportation. And in my plan, I had a departure and arrival from each mid-air transportation from the existing bar station that are already above ground. And I would work on the inertia. It would not be any use of electricity. Everything will be solar power. And every departure from MacArthur Boulevard or other service station would be directly to people who have access to and use the public, like Pixar, like Novartis and all that. These people would be able to contract their own private line for their own employee, and that would relieve the transportation on the road system. I'm still open to explore and give you a plan that I made and designed many years ago, and that has not been accepted by the Budaka, the previous city council. And so maybe if you're ready, I'm still willing to make a presentation on that for the benefit of Emeryville, because here in Emeryville, the location is ideal from the main bar station, which is MacArthur. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. Other members of the public who wish to speak?
Could I get your other face, the smug one? Yeah, thanks. I couldn't help but notice that one of the improvements was actually an improvement around the neighborhood where we both live, the one that you moved into about a year ago, and everything's gotten worse. So pluck these off the ground about 20 yards from your condo. So it'd be nice if you took some time, when you're not, ribbon cutting and taking selfies with Keith Carson or whoever, and kind of help your neighborhood out. Thanks. Definitely an endorsement to improve our neighborhood and help my family and your neighbors.
Thank you. Any other members of the public who wish to speak? Seeing none, we'll close public comment. And for this time, can we begin with Vice Mayor Medina?
Absolutely. Thank you to our Public Works team for that very thorough presentation. I want to acknowledge that there are 65 projects that they're already working on, first of all, and they're very busy and stretched. For myself personally, of the projects they're working on, I think San Pablo represents a really exciting one for us. It's a half mile of our city. That is a 1.2 square mile city, and so I encourage everyone to stay focused on that because it has such a big impact on our quality of life for so many residents. However, another massive quality of life improvement that we could have is silent rail crossings. And I strongly urge staff to jump on that funding to prioritize that very long-sounding grant application, as I have heard from so many residents in that area. And I live in the Triangle, and I hear those rail crossings at night. Everyone can hear it. I think that is something that would broadly impact our entire community in a very positive way if we can reduce the amount of noise coming from the rail crossings. Following that, I'm really interested in the IDEA grant. And I would like to, if we have time later on, look into that. I think technology and being innovative is something that Emeryville really can shine in. And I personally really like the idea of being able to bike through an intersection and get a green light. I don't know, Scott? So out of that list, for me, definitely though, the silent rail crossing takes a priority in terms of the number of our residents it would impact.
Thank you, Member Pats.
I hear that on the silent rail crossing. I have been born and raised by train tracks, and so I actually love rail noise. I'm an outlier, but I think Mayor Bowders and I share this affinity for the rail sounds. So that said, I'll vote against my own interest and encourage you to pursue that long grant, because I know I'm an outlier on that. Otherwise, I just want to say thank you for the great presentation. I do want to circle back around to car charging, because that is a personal just issue of mine, and I'd like to start talking about level 3 car charging at some point. Most of the discussion always revolves around level 1 and 2, and it just won't be feasible until we get to level 3. And I will leave it at that.
Thank you, Member Donahue.
Yes, get those rails to quiet down. I appreciate what Andrew said about sewers. People are not so positive about them, but when they fail, it's a problem. But we have some other projects like that we didn't discuss tonight that still, nonetheless, we have to think about and somehow figure out how to deal with Point Emery, AKA Point Ashby and Rip Rap, because we could find ourselves without a point at a certain point. And, you know, it's just like, it's one of the things that we'll somehow find a way to deal with, I'm sure. But I also appreciate how many projects you have, and that you can, it's, so many of the projects are dependent upon funding that we just don't have within our own capital improvement project. It's grant dependent. And so far, Public Works has been very good about shifting gears, like getting our 2 mid-block crossings underway, and I really support that because that just sort of came out of nowhere for both, and I really hand it to you for being adaptive to that and figuring out a way to do that. It is true that I think we're a sort of a hodgepodge city. We don't have good overall planning with our transportation, and I really appreciate what John Sherman said about going for that Caltrans grant and trying to get a more holistic approach for us going forward. I think that would be helpful. We're getting gridlocking that are preventing our Emery go-rounds from functioning, and you know, if this continues, we're really in a pickle. And I think that we have to have some overall thinking that could get us through further densification, which is due to happen. So I think that's an important thing for us to aim for. And well, I appreciate Charlie's interlude about his projects. I've aimed to try to connect our city to the bayfront in a bicycle pedestrian way that gets around the really problematic Powell and I-80 exit that is taking out a lot. We've had 2 police officers hit by cars with drivers looking left, turning right. You know, this is a real problem intersection, and I think for the long term, we really should look at the regional bicycle traffic coming down from the north through our city to get onto the Bay Bridge. And the meeting that I attended, that you can see all the design work out in the bridgeway here, had representative from BCDC, who are the regulators for the edge of the bay, and she had a term at some of the kind of out-of-the-box ideas. Well, maybe we could consider that a transportation project, meaning have, you'll see one of the projects where the Bay Trail would go a little further north to Chevy's, turn to the south, and then cross into the bay directly on a bridge that would be right into the crescent, but staying away from the shore for the sensitive birds, and then go straight to a bridge design that you can see that's very dramatic, designed by a young man from China, and I think you'll see, you know, bigness and thought and scale in there, but I think it's worth considering. And I think that there are other versions of how we can further access our bayfront without harming bird life. It's been shown, and I think we're starting to get regional interest in this kind of future crossing. So while this is a future project, I would really like it if we could do some minimum steps to keep advancing it and to get some kind of study going into the future on this, because I think there is enough regional interest in this, in solving our problem through our city for the regional traffic, that we could get some additional funding to develop these ideas and get some cooperation among the various agencies for that that project.
Thank you, Member Martinez.
Thank you. I want to take this opportunity to deeply appreciate staff and the many projects that we've asked them to juggle as a council and as a city, and I think you're doing a phenomenal job. And I also want to thank my colleagues who serve on the Transportation and Public Works committees for doing the deep thinking on these many, many projects. That said, I do have some priorities that I would like to see. I agree with everyone on number one, the rail crossing. Secondly, the South Bayfront Bridge. I already know that's your top priority, but I just want to emphasize that I'm here for you. And I am so excited to be there on the day we break ground, and I will be fighting with my colleagues to be the first person who crosses it. I am also interested in safety and efficiency on the San Pablo multimodal corridor. As someone who walks, bikes, drives, and takes transit on that street, it's one of those areas where many people who don't reside or work in Emeryville pass through, and we want to get them through our city as quickly and efficiently as possible, and hopefully not in a car. Hopefully, and we can encourage them to go in a different way. And to that end, I want to support Mr. Sherman's suggestion that we go for that Caltrans grant. And I've named the study in my head. It's the Emeryville Transportation Specific Plan. So I would love to have this holistic overlay of what we're already doing, but a study that would inform what our successes are and what our weak points are. And I know Mr. Sherman and Mr. Keller can see it all from where they live. They can just look down on the city and see what's working, and they're the ones who told me about the trains that ran the whole length of the city and that also got into Berkeley and into Oakland at the same time, which causes 10-minute traffic delays at all of those crossings. So they have a specific knowledge, and I'm sure they would be very active in that process if we were to move forward with that type of plan. But those are my priorities: silent rail crossing, South Bayfront Bridge, San Pablo multimodal corridor, and pursuing grant funding for a holistic view of Emeryville traffic and transportation management.
Thank you. I want to also just touch upon a couple additional things in regards to what staff have done. I want to agree with all of my colleagues up to this point on all the remarks they made. You guys do a tremendous amount of work. I know how much, not just projects, but all the day-to-day work you do in the city, and we're all very grateful to you for that. There's a couple opportunities, when we discussed putting this on an agenda a couple months ago, there's some upcoming opportunities with SB1 and ACTC, as Amber talked about, for leverage, like really leveraging other dollars to help yield more transit infrastructure and improvements in our community. And I want to just echo, I think it's across the board, that the number one thing that this council would like to see us go for is quiet zones in the form of the Safe Rail application and having the match come from MTC for the ACTC money. So being able to fund as much, if not all of that, through funding outside the city would be great. I want to thank Councilmember Medina for the work she's undertaking with the San Pablo Avenue Corridor Study, and I would invite the community to really participate. It's a $4 million study that studies San Pablo all the way from downtown Oakland to our county line with Contra Costa, and is a real chance, an opportunity for our community and several others to reinvent transit in our communities, bike transit, BRT, things that we need to move into, the next best phase of what we're doing. So in terms of other items that are on the list of things that could be done, I think for me, I would like to see if council is supportive of seeking grants to do a couple studies. So in particular, the scramble was an idea I had kind of brought back. I think I'm not the first person to bring it up, but brought back to staff about, can we find a way to make biking across Powell and Hollis easier? I've heard that there are some logistical challenges with perhaps a scramble as it's currently implemented, but there's maybe other ways. And I want to just highlight, we had a study session on fire safety 2 weeks ago, and at that time we saw that we have really excellent fire service in the community, but one area where we kind of are keeping our eye on it is response times from Station 34 in relation to how they move down Powell Street. And I just want us to really think about and look at how technology that would allow them to depart the station and sync all the lights going eastbound to a call in the southeast corner of the city can be hooked up with the same technology that could make a scramble possible, so that people who interact with that interchange can also be safe biking and walking across that intersection. Other than that, I don't really have anything else to add. These are all excellent projects. I would like to see if we can work with Oakland and Caltrans on the connection for the southeast corner of the Greenway to Mandela as a way of connecting people completely through the city from Berkeley BART to BART in West Oakland. That would be in the Bike East Bay, and I have met about that a few times, and they very strongly endorse it. So that's of interest to me as well. I know that's a more complicated project because of all the jurisdictional partners. But I have nothing to add other than appreciation. And I know, Andrew, you probably had a few comments that you would like to respond to. Do you have anything you want to come up and take a response to?
Well, first, thank you for the feedback. I think that we heard you. Do something about the railroad crossing.
Yeah.
Keep a vision in the southeast corner and out there by the Emeryville Crescent. That planning process could happen a little bit sooner than others. Charlie's willing and ready to move on that when he can find the time. And then certainly the Bayfront Bridge, the corridor is an important project. One of the things that Ryan had talked about a little bit was what we're calling our transportation, corridor management, and that's exactly the type of thing that Mr. Sherman was talking about. Is that we're starting to try as much as we can to look at some of these as systems, not just as individual projects, and how they link with each other, not only in the sequencing of how we deliver the projects, the timing of how we deliver those projects, but also when we're doing the traffic signal enhancements, the other grants that Ryan's talking about going to get to help make the signals more sophisticated, to do the kind of synchronization that you're talking about, and continue to look at the smaller grain projects as well, the crosswalks and mid-block crossings, et cetera. They're all part of and informed by the bicycle and pedestrian plan. And that stands as a project in the capital plan, and from that can flow a series of smaller projects that we can do all under that idea of implementing and continuing to implement those kinds. Point Emery, we have a proposal from a consultant we're reviewing and trying to negotiate them down. We don't have the construction dollars, but we are doing something about that. We're aware of it, and I have to do something because the Parks Committee wants me back in January to tell them what I've done. And I said, I'm the person they need to talk to, so hopefully we've done something by then. But other than that, I think that we're good. If there's anything else that you wanted to add for us.
Thank you, Andrew. Member Martinez.
There was just one more point I wanted to make. I wanted to appreciate you, Mr. Mayor, and our Vice Mayor for both serving on the Alameda County Transportation Commission. You as our member and Vice Mayor Medina as our alternate. And I know with Measure BB funds in there, you're helping to shape the budget and fighting for Emeryville to be a priority, as part of the region. So I wanted to thank you for the work that you're doing there, and I know that that you're keenly aware of how to leverage grant funding and other funding that may come our way, and that helps inform how we prioritize projects in the city. So I wanted to thank you for that work.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you, Andrew, Ryan, Amber, cameo from Charlie. And that will end item 6.2. This meeting is adjourned. Members, would you like a 5-minute break?
Yes.
I'm seeing a couple yeses. We will take a 5-minute recess before we can continue. Hi, Andre. How are you?
I'm ready.
I was on to you next. You can finish that, Candy.
I want to hear that.
Okay. The time is 7:52. I'm calling to order a meeting of the City of Emeryville as successor agency for the Emeryville Redevelopment Agency. This is the blue agenda. It'll be a very short meeting. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Donahue?
Here.
Councilmember Martinez?
Here.
Councilmember Pats?
Here.
Vice Mayor Medina?
Here.
And Mayor Bowders.
Here. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
I second.
We have a motion from Member Pats and a second from Vice Mayor Medina. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Donahue?
Aye.
Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Councilmember Pats?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Medina?
Aye.
And Mayor Bowders.
Aye. Public comment for consent item or items that are not on this agenda. Anyone wishing to speak?
Go again. Rob Arias, okay. Was born and grew up in the East Bay. I'm the grandson of Trinidad and Casimiro Arias, third generation Californian. In fact, I'm a quarter Native American. This land is my land, as much as anybody else's land, I suppose. So you might have heard an account of an incident last meeting from a member of the public who thinks he's entitled to enter my son's daycare as he pleases because he needs to go potty. I want to read an employee's account of what happened, filed in an incident report regarding this breach. Just an excerpt from it, in fact. At 4:40, blank called asking to speak to the director. Since blank was busy, I called you and transferred his call to you. A few minutes after that, he came to the door again. I refused to open it for him because he looked angry and was banging on the door. He wouldn't leave, so I went over and opened the door, but did not let him in the center. He proceeded to berate me and told me that you were going to bring disciplinary action against me for being rude. He told me that he pays taxes to Emeryville, so he has the right to enter the building at any time. He also said that we have an obligation to let anyone from off the street come in because it was a prospective family coming to the center. He would let them in. During this time, I didn't say anything. I just nodded. At the end, he said, you were going to bring disciplinary action against me. And I said, I'm sure you will, and thank you. And I closed the door. At that point, I was in fear for my safety and safety of the center because he did not seem to be in a right state of mind. Since blank was busy helping with kids, I asked her if I could stay at the desk until 6 o'clock, even though I was supposed to be off at 4:30. I didn't feel it was safe to leave the lobby unattended with all the people on the street. At 4:56, he called the center again, demanding to speak to you again. I called you to let you know he wanted to talk to you, and he responded and said, by saying he would call you back directly. I clicked over to tell him that you would be calling him back, and he was mid-rant saying, you don't have a right to do this to me, over and over again. I asked if he was talking to me because it seemed like he was talking to someone else since he had just been on hold. He was very agitated by this time. When I told him you would call him, he started yelling unintelligently, so I just hung up. I have not seen or heard from him since. This is one of the dozens of emails I've had over the years. You know, this man terrorizing your staff, seniors, women, small business owners. This man is a founding member of an organization and ringleader of a group called RULE, Residents United for Livable Emeryville, a group that the 5 of you have received endorsements from, you've taken campaign contributions from. I guess whatever it takes to get elected, I suppose. I mean, John, don't you remember just being tormented by this guy and me coming to your defense?
Thank you for your comment.
Whatever it takes to get elected, John.
Any other members of the public? Andre, come on forward.
Can you hold on one second? Can he take his box with him, please?
Hold on one second, Andre.
Andre, hold on.
That's okay. Mr. Arias, you left something. Would you like to take it? Chief Tejada, would you do me a favor? I apologize for impeding on your time, but I would appreciate that greatly. Thank you. Courteousness is not a requirement at public comment. Andre, come on forward.
I'm sure you notice I don't hear that well. so sign language is okay. I want to remind you an incident that happened many, many years ago, and it was about railroad crossing. Almost got ran over by a train that came up hidden from another one. And I did not make an issue with the Amtrak. I could have. There was plenty witness. I didn't get touched, neither hurt. But at that time, I was talking to a person in Berkeley City Council. I forgot his name, and the subject of underground crossing instead of over the ground came up. And what he said is that historically the Amtrak was okay to make all the underground crossing in Emeryville, and they did it in Berkeley on Ashby. So it's a possibility because from their measurement, the high tide doesn't come close to the level of the ground. The roadway in the Ashby station, Ashby underpass. So all the things that we have been talking about, the noise of the Amtrak and all that, could be solved if all the underground crossing would exist. Then we would need, all we need to do is to put wall on the Amtrak, and we would not need to blow the horn, and it would raise the property value of all the apartment there, because seeing a train pass by is not something scenic. You know, I mean, so maybe we should consider again digging under the railroad track and having, if it's not pedestrian, having some traffic, light traffic, not truck, but light traffic, which will be less height than for truck. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. Any other members of the public who wish to comment at this time? Seeing none, the consent calendar, is there a motion?
So moved.
I second.
I have a motion from Member Pats and a second from Member Donahue. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Donahue?
Aye.
Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Councilmember Pats?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Medina?
Aye.
And Mayor Bowders.
Aye. The consent calendar is approved. There are no action items. The time is 7:59. This meeting is adjourned. The time is 7:59. I call to order this meeting of the City Council of the City of Emeryville. Madam Clerk, please note that all members are still here. Approval of the final agenda. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion from Member Pats and a second from Vice Mayor Medina. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Donahue?
Aye.
Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Councilmember Pats?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Medina?
Aye.
And Mayor Bowders.
Aye. There are no special orders today. Madam Clerk, are there any committee or commission vacancies that you wish to report?
Yes, there's just one that I initially announced that has arisen due to resignation on PAPCO, which is the ACTC Paratransit Advisory and Planning Commission. The term for that will expire on December 31st of 2018. Applications are due by January 15th, and the appointment will be made at the council's February 6th meeting.
Okay, thank you. Council members, are there any special announcements, or, and recall now we've merged that with meetings reported on that you've attended. Member Donahue, do you have any?
Yes. Last week, I went to a kind of meeting. It was up at the Oaks Club. It looked a little bit like a protest, but no doorways were being blocked. The Unite Here union was asking the management of the Oaks Club for a contract, and they were also wanting to award Worst Boss of the Year award, partly because their union covers a lot of restaurant workers and hotel workers, and while those employees at our Oaks Club most of them are earning minimum wage there at Oaks Corner. The cooks get 25 cents an hour more, but the family of four medical payments are $500 a month, and the that is the worst for Unite Here. And they just are making no progress. And this is a institution that we endorse and is good for our city for tax purposes. I know many neighbors who like to go to Oaks Corner appreciate the staff who work there. A lot of the staff has been working there for tens of years, so they're longtime workers. And the Oaks Club has done very well. They haven't seen a dip in their business, and so many gambling institutions in the United States are willing to fund the restaurants as a draw to the gambling side. But the Oaks Corner is not seeing any love for their employees. And
Member Donahue, if you have a meeting you want to report on or report, we can accept that, but we can't take discussion of an item.
Okay, I was at the meeting, and I want to say that I went in to talk to management, and they basically kicked me out and threatened to arrest me if I didn't leave. So that's the meeting.
All right. I appreciate that, sharing that. Thank you. Member Martinez?
Not a meeting, but I just wanted to say that I attended the lighting of the Shellmound Gateway at which you spoke, and I just want to recommend that people drive on Shellmound under Powell and notice how much, or walk, because that's actually when you notice how much more pleasant it is and how much safer it feels, and how that one area now feels so much more connected to the rest of the city. So I just wanted to comment on that.
Thank you. Member Medina?
Yes, I mentioned this last time, but a special announcement. There's still time to give your input to Caltrans for their bike plan, including on San Pablo, which we just spent a lot of time discussing, and I think a lot of members of our community have input on bike facilities on San Pablo. The website where you can put your input is dot.ca.gov/D4/bike plan. So you have until Friday, December 22nd to input your concerns or ideas for bike facilities along that route.
Thank you. Member Pats?
My meetings are dark this month, but I do want to say that I did also go to the art opening at the Senior Center, and there was both the adoption of the placement of the new piece we acquired this year, which was wonderful. I think Andrea has left, but she did an amazing job, so I want to compliment her. And there was also some pieces had been moved over, which were portraits that really just make the Senior Center that much warmer and much nicer. And as I am wont to do, I will talk about my son who went with me, who looked at a senior sitting at the bar and then looking at the portraits on the wall behind him and pointed out that we had a celebrity in our midst because it was his portrait, and it just made the whole event come alive. So if you get a chance, one, you have to see the piece we acquired in person. It is wonderful. And Scott, if you'd help me with the artist's name, I'd appreciate it.
Kazuko Watanabe.
Thank you. And take the time to walk into the bar and see the portraits of Emeryville Senior Center seniors. It's not just a painting of them, but it's a little bit of their story, and it just makes the whole center come alive. So I just want to share that.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you, Member Pats. So as Councilmember Martinez noted, I attended the Shellmound Gateway opening as well, and I endorse what she just said about visiting it. On the boring side, I sat through a 2-hour meeting on PERS, which was super informational, and I will be asking staff to share some of the takeaways that we received from that meeting with council. I attended the small business Jingle Mingle at the Sheraton Four Points last week. About 100 business partners in the community RSVP'd and attended. It was a great opportunity for me to meet with a number of new businesses in the community, and I appreciated that chance to join in that activity. And then in terms of just a couple things I want to let the public know about, at the ECCL on Friday, Bobby Miller and others and friends of the Emeryville Community Action Program, which is a nonprofit here in our city that feeds people who are low income, who are hungry. There is really no litmus test for getting assistance there. They will have a toy drive at the ECCL between 5 and 7 p.m. on Friday, and I would encourage anyone who's around or available to participate. And then there will be an opportunity to assist in feeding people who are hungry and homeless in the community on Saturday, and I will be cooking all day and then feeding people living on the street all evening. And anyone who wants to join myself and all the other good people at ECAP is free to do that. All right, with that, we will move on to the city manager's report.
No report this evening, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Ex parte communications. Do any members have ex parte communications they wish to report? I'll start on my left. Mr. Pats?
Nothing to report.
I have nothing there. Member Medina? Nope. Member Martinez?
No, sir.
And Member Donahue?
No.
Okay, I did speak with representatives of Trader Vic's regarding item 11.2, and I also exchanged emails with residents of the Watergate community regarding 11.2, which is the cabaret license for Trader Vic's for calendar year 2018. Public comment for items on the consent agenda or items not on the agenda. Anyone wishing to speak? There will be, just to be clear, if you're here for the Trader Vic's item, there is a public comment for that as well later. So you're not discouraged from speaking now, but if you want to speak on that item when we get to it, we'll get to it very shortly. You'll wait? Okay, thank you. Any other members wish to speak? Seeing none, the consent calendar. And before I request a motion, I have an amendment I need to ask for. Does anyone else have an amendment or an item they wish to pull?
No.
Okay, Madam Clerk, I have just a couple things. I'm going to ask for Councilmember Martinez to help me with this. On item 10.3, the minutes state that Councilmember Martinez stated she spoke with Michael Blair, and I believe it was Sean Burrows.
I spoke with Sean Burrows. That's correct. Thank you.
Sean Burrows. So the minutes currently state she spoke to Michael Blair, and was that already changed? I don't know about it.
No, but that's what you said.
No, what I said is I spoke with our local member from Local 55, and
Sean
was in the room.
he was in the room, so I gestured towards him, but I understand that's not a record that you would have necessarily seen. So if you would make that amendment, that is correct.
And Burrows is actually spelled Burrows.
I found that out after too.
No problem. And item 10.7, I would just like to add clarification to the minutes. That was the item related to the cannabis award on November 21st. And there were two motions made that evening, and in both motions, it just simply says a motion was made to approve this resolution and there was a vote. I would like you to clarify that a motion was made to approve Rochambeau New Leaf in the first motion, and a motion was made to approve East Bay Therapeutics in the second motion, because a person reading the minutes would not know which awardee was given by what vote count on each item.
Okay, I feel like I did that, but it must have not registered when
It didn't show up like that.
Okay, thank you.
With that, with those amendments, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes with those amendments.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Mayor Bowders and a second by Vice Mayor Medina to approve the minutes. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Donahue?
Aye.
Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Councilmember Pats?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Medina?
Aye.
And Mayor Bowders.
Aye, and to clarify, that was a motion to approve consent, not just minutes. We're on to item 11.1, public hearings, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Emeryville granting an annual card room license to the Oaks Card Club for calendar year 2018. Chief Tejada.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and council members. This evening you have in your packet a staff report and resolution for the renewal of the annual card room license to the Oakland's Card Club for calendar year 2018. Chapter 5 of Title 5 of the Emeryville Muni Code governs all aspects of card rooms in the city of Emeryville. In order to renew, the applicant must submit an application with the associated fees, and this is followed by an investigation by police department personnel. The police department monitors the activity throughout the year in and about the card room, and we continue to experience full collaboration, cooperation from the management and employees of the club. To date, in 2017, we've had 280 incidents compared to 327 for 2016 and 544 for 2015. So it's a 6.5% decrease in reported crimes comparing this year to last year. We've not received any negative information from the Department of Justice regarding the operation of the card room. The police department investigation did not identify any issues that would warrant a denial of this application, and so staff is recommending that City Council approve the resolution granting a card room license to the Oaks Card Club for calendar year 2018.
Thank you. Members, do you have questions for Chief Tejada?
No.
Seeing none, does the Oaks Card Club, are they present tonight? No? Okay. Members of the public who wish to speak on this is a public hearing. The hearing is now open. Seeing nobody wishing to speak, this hearing is now closed. Members' discussion, I'll start with Member Pats.
I'm ready to just move the item.
Okay, Member Pats, would you like to make a motion?
So I move to approve.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Do other members wish to comment before we take a vote?
Yeah, I'd like to comment.
Okay.
In the application, you can see that the owner of the Oaks Club has done well for this year, for himself and for the income for the Oaks Club. But the workers at Oaks Corner are going backwards in their effective living standard. Things are getting worse. Their health care costs have gone up, and it's a shame to see something like this happen, where a business that's in effect has a monopoly in our city is not spreading any of the good income to the people that really are on the edge. You know, there's a minimum standard that people have to do to get by, and I think the Oaks Club is being a little bit greedy. And, you know, I would just like in the future for us to consider having maybe some competition, maybe issuing some other card club licenses to it, you know, somebody who could show that they can do well, but they can also pay people a minimum standard of living that allows them to have a living wage. So,
thank you, Member Donahue. Other members wish to respond or comment? No? Madam Clerk, we have a motion by Member Pats and a second by Vice Mayor Medina to approve the application as proposed.
Councilmember Donahue?
No.
Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Councilmember Pats?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Medina?
Aye.
And Mayor Bowders.
Aye. The measure passes 4-1. Item 11.2, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Emeryville authorizing the Chief of Police to issue an annual cabaret license to Trader Vic's for calendar year 2018. Welcome back.
Thank you. Okay, so item number 2 is the discussion and consideration of the Trader Vic's application for an annual cabaret license. In overview, in the past and to date, we look at things like complaints, the communication between the business and residents, what level of cooperation has existed, and the compromises in the condition of approval. To date, we've had between January 1st and October 30th, 7 noise complaints for this establishment. Communication and meetings, the residents and Trader Vic's continue to have meetings. There is a significant increase in the level of cooperation communication between them compared to 2 years ago. And we have conditions of approval to present to you tonight that are similar to the ones that were agreed upon last year. Those conditions of, well, I will define what a cabaret is first. A cabaret is defined in section 5-4.02 subsection C of the Emeryville Muni Code. It's any event or place where live entertainment is provided by or for any patron or guest, and to which admission may be gained by the public generally with or without payment of a fee or cover charge or the purchase or presentation of a ticket. So that's the definition of cabaret. The license would be valid from January 1st through December 31st of 2018. The license, if approved, permits music to be played inside Trader Vic's and not on the exterior patio, and all exterior doors and windows will be closed for the designated date and times of each cabaret event. In the event that an authorized agent of the City of Emeryville determines that Trader Vic's has violated the noise ordinance on account of live or amplified music during a cabaret event, he or she shall direct Trader Vic's to reduce the music's volume to a level that is compliant with our noise ordinance. A violation in the same 24-hour period, the Trader Vic's agrees to immediately discontinue any and all music for the remainder of that calendar day. Hours of operation, Sunday 11:30 a.m. to 10 p.m., Monday through Wednesday, 11:30 to 10:30, although I believe they're closed on Monday, so that would be Tuesday and Wednesday, and then Thursday through Saturday, 5 p.m. to 12 a.m. Trader Vic's, shall designate a point of contact. The contact person will be immediately available for all concerns or complaints, and Trader Vic's, as part of the granting of this license, shall utilize a valet service. Any violations could result in suspension or revocation pursuant to the Emeryville Municipal Code 5-4.08 or 5-4.09, and violations may also be subject to administrative citations. Staff is recommending that City Council approve the application.
Thank you, Chief Tejada. Members, do you have questions? I just have one. You mentioned, but I didn't hear you quite right. How many complaints were there this year?
7 noise complaints.
7. And those are founded, and those are founded complaints, or those are just you responded to?
We responded to 7 noise complaints.
Thank you. Member
No
Donahue?
action was taken on our part other than that.
I'm just curious whether you know what was the origin of what the noise was. Was it on the deck? Was it at the entry? Or do you have record of where the noise came from?
I do at the police department.
Okay.
Member Martinez.
Chief, this may be the same answer, but do you have a record of noise complaints in previous periods where you've recorded that? So is 7 a lot? A little?
A little. I think when we were here this time last year, it was more than that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no other questions. Thank you, Chief Tejada. This is a public hearing. The public hearing is now open. I have 2 speaker cards. I'll call them first. Fran Chiappetta. All speakers have 3 minutes.
Hi, everyone. I received this email from Joe Lutz, who couldn't be here tonight, and it says everything I wanted to say, but with a lot more class than I could. So I am sharing this tonight with all of you. Thanks, Joe. Hi, all. I wanted to give you my thoughts on the upcoming Trader Vic's Cabaret license meeting. As you know, we at Watergate were very concerned about this being granted, but had faith in Trader Vic's and the council to make this work. To the relief of all, Jonathan Roman and Rhett Rosen were true to their word. We have few issues, save intermittent crowd exit noise at the entrance on a few occasions. This excellent work is a continuation of how Mr. Roman has improved the operation of the restaurant and continues to do so. However, we still do have a deck noise issue, and unfortunately, the initial inexpensive mitigation we agreed to as a team were vetoed by upper management, and we are still enduring noise issues, though they are not as frequent as 2 or 3 months ago. We are concerned because of the holiday parties that are starting to happen. I know Jonathan and Rhett are committed to working with us on this issue. The deck noise is from the private parties and not related to the cabaret. I think it would be helpful and appropriate for the council to express a desire to see some mitigations now and more robust ones as agreed to after the finalization of the noise ordinance. Again, I want to sincerely thank the City Council for their support, as well as Jonathan and Rhett for turning around our communication and running a first-class operation. Of course, Emeryville Police Department gets a big shout out for treating our residents with respect and professionalism at all times. Happy holidays to you all, and I hope you take time to hug your loved ones. Life is short. And I just wanted to add one thing that Jennifer mentioned. Part of the reason there were less calls to the police is because we didn't want to use the police facilities and wanted to call Trader Vic's directly when there was too much noise. So I think the 7 is not a really good indication of what was called in, but just as how many people they sent out to check out the noise. So Thank you.
Thank you, Fran. Buzz Cardoza.
I live at Watergate. I live in the westernmost corner. My apartment's on the 3rd floor, and it's approximately 100 feet from the porte cochere, the covered entry to Trader Vic's. Jonathan Roman has done a great job of, particularly in the evening, of keeping people inside until their car is ready for them. So we don't have groups of people standing outside carrying on their party. And it has gotten much quieter. There have been a couple of occasions when this hasn't worked. One recently, I think there was a new valet staff that didn't understand how it was supposed to work. But by and large, they've done a great job. I don't hear noise from the deck, so that doesn't affect me directly. One other thing I notice is that the lights in the parking lot, there are 5 overhead lights. 2 of them don't work. None of the lights along the pathway between the parking lot and the harbor are working, and they used to. I don't know if that's something that you can have fixed at this time, but I'd just like to call it to your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Buzz. Those are all the speaker cards I have. Other members of the public who wish to speak on this item? Please come now if you do. Andre? He can't hear me otherwise, sorry.
I'm not a customer of Trader Vic, but I've been there with many other people, and I found the establishment outstanding. The noise issue is not an issue for me, as you know. What I see
Andre,
is that
that's the quote of the day.
Yeah, but what I see is that on the North Bay fire, Trader Vic offer its facility to receive donation to help the people in the North Bay, and that strike me as something that is great. I mean, we should really commend Trader Vic management to do such a humanitarian help, and I'm touched. I just cannot pass on without making a comment in their favor, regardless of all the other issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. We'll take you now.
Better run.
Thank you for...
Could you pull the microphone so the folks at home can hear you?
Here? Okay.
There you go, thanks.
I'm Tracy Giles. I am a customer of Trader Vic's, and I had the pleasure of having my 50th birthday there. And in the planning of it, I wanted to have sort of a Hawaiian luau type of thing. That's why I went there. And I said, I'd love to have music out on the deck and hula girls and da-da-da-da-da. And they were like, well, you're going to have to isolate that music inside, you know, and... I was like, oh, why is that? And they said that we really want to, we're trying to cooperate with our neighbors, and it just felt really nice that they cared, you know. And so I said, that's fine. Can I have it inside? Yes, no problem. And we had a wonderful time. I had 100 people there. The reason why I came tonight is many people have said to me, the music made it. And so I just thought it was important to say that having Trader Vic's with no music would not be Trader Vic's. So that's all I wanted to say.
Well, thank you for giving up your evening to join us. Welcome.
Can you hear me okay?
I think so, yes.
Hi, my name's Craig Walker. Spent 30 plus years in law enforcement as a police officer and a deputy sheriff. I also have a penchant for tiki bars, which my colleagues probably don't know and hopefully won't be watching. I got the email.
Broadcast, Craig.
Thank you. I got the email about the meeting, thought I'd come down and make a couple of comments. First, from 30 years in law enforcement, I can tell you that if all I had to deal with were places like Trader Vic's, I would be a very, very happy man. It seems to me, to echo some of the comments that have been made, that they run a pretty good show. My wife and I go there on a fairly regular basis and have never had the slightest issues. And I would echo some of the comments here about the efforts to try to get along with the neighbors. We were there this evening, saw signs outside to asking folks to keep their voices down, etc. So I think they do a pretty good job. And I would urge you, maybe from wearing my tiki hat, Trader Vic's is an institution, certainly locally, but also in the tiki world. And I think they are making some very, very good efforts to get along with their neighbors and be a good tiki establishment. And I think all that put together, they deserve your support. So thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Other members of the public who wish to speak? Come on up.
Hello, thank you. My name is Tom Gibson. I'm a lawyer. I have an office here in Emeryville. And I'm a customer of Trader Vic's. I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, and 60 years ago we had a Trader Vic's in Atlanta, Georgia. It was a favorite of my parents. And now here I am in Emeryville, sort of the mothership of Trader Vic's. And I just wanted to say those words in support of an institution that I think we should try to work with in any way we can to keep it viable.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Other members of the public who wish to speak on this item? Seeing and hearing none, public comment, and the hearing is now closed. And we'll bring this back for discussion. I'll start with Member Donahue.
Well, I asked earlier about where the sound was coming from, partly because, as I remember, one of the relatively inexpensive modifications would be making double doors to the deck. And we talked about this as being relatively inexpensive and maybe solving some of the noise problems without too much cost. And I'm just wondering, whether that perception is still true and whether Trader Vic's has realized that that's not a good investment or what. I'm just curious about that.
Okay. Member Martinez?
I just want to reflect on the relationship between Trader Vic's and the residents of Watergate, because I do remember when it wasn't so sunny, so I wanted to take some time to appreciate management and give a special shout out to Jonathan Roman, whose cell phone is always on. Yes. As to whether, all of your orders are always strictly communicated, I hope for the best. But I know that residents rely on you for that open line of communication. And I also want to thank the residents of Watergate, especially Joe Lutz and Fran Geppetta, but also not to mention Buzz Cardosa and Mary Farrell, all of you who are active in keeping those lines of communication open and giving feedback to Trader Vic's. Because it makes a lot less work for city staff and for council when there's a relationship there and there are regular meetings, and I understand that that's been happening. And that said, I would like to support Mr. Lutz's letter with his desire to see mitigations that were previously agreed to and more robust mitigations after the noise ordinance. I just want the management at Trader Vic's to know that I support that, and I hope to see that come to fruition. That said, he also noted that is not in any way related to the license that we are granting tonight, so I would be in favor of supporting that.
Thank you. Member Pats.
Oh, I thought you were going to Medina next. So, thought about having to recuse myself because the overlap of tiki bar enthusiast and my friends doesn't have much room in either circle, so I have some bias here. And that said, there's also two institutions in Emeryville, the Card Club and the Tiki, and Trader Vic's. It's been here a long time, and so I'm fully in support of this. I was really impressed with Mr. Lutz's letter, because I know that he has been working on this, and so I was really impressed that you guys were able to work that out, and so I enthusiastically support this.
Member Medina.
Nothing particular to add here.
Okay, I too have nothing to add. I want to echo the prior comments about the partnership both between the staff and management at Trader Vic's who are wonderful, and on everything you're doing. You're wonderful. And all the effort and advocacy from the residents who are at Watergate on this and many other issues. You're a benefit to your community, and thank you for that. On top of that, I don't have anything specific to add. I do want to make a comment about something I want to thank Mr. Carpio for raising. I did spend an afternoon with the staff at Trader Vic's on North Bay Fire Relief, and I won't miss an opportunity to plug any business in our community who is trying to do something to help other people. So, you know, hats off to you. Thank you so much for that. So with that, do I have a motion?
I move approval.
Second.
I have a motion from Member Pats and a second from Vice Mayor Medina to approve the cabaret license. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Donahue?
Aye.
Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Councilmember Pats?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Medina?
Aye.
And Mayor Bowders.
Aye. That's 5-0. The license is approved. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Action items. We have one action item this evening, which is item 12.1, the introduction and first reading of an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Emeryville amending public safety regulations in Title IV of the Emeryville Municipal Code regarding speed limits. Andrew and Ryan.
Just Andrew.
Or maybe just Andrew.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council. This is an introduction and first reading, as you mentioned, the ordinance regarding the public safety regulations, the speed limits. Staff recommends that City Council approve the engineering survey for speed limits and adopt the first reading of the ordinance amending the public safety regulations to designate speed limits for 9 street segments. By doing so, the California Vehicle Code then authorizes cities to increase or decrease them on the basis of these traffic surveys. It was noted that the only proposed change in speed limits for the street segments was to reduce the speed limit on the northern segment of Hollis Street from 30 to 25 miles per hour. All other streets surveyed had their existing posted speed limits verified. And by doing so and adopting the ordinance, City Council's approval will enable the Emeryville Police Department to perform radar enforcement on the street segments studied. Essentially, this is a survey that cleaned things up. There were a couple of cases where we had a posted speed limit that really hadn't had the proper survey and gone through it. So this cleans all that up, and all of our posted speed limits will be accurate.
Thank you, Andrew. Members, do you have questions for Andrew?
Nope.
Seeing none, this is open for public comment. There are 3 minutes to comment on this item. Any members of the public wish to comment on speed limits? Seeing none, I'll take a motion to read the ordinance by title only.
I will move to read by title only.
I'll second.
I have a motion from Vice Mayor Medina and a second from Member Pats. Mr. City Attorney, please read the motion, or actually, I'm sorry, Madam Clerk, please call the roll on the motion.
Councilmember Donahue?
Aye.
Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Councilmember Pats?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Medina?
Aye.
And Mayor Bowders.
Aye.
An ordinance of the City Council of the City of Emeryville adding Section 4-9.39 to Chapter 9 of Title 4 of the Emeryville Municipal Code, Vehicular Traffic and Parking.
I'll take a motion on the ordinance.
Move approval.
Second.
I have a motion from Member Martinez and a second by Member Pats. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Donahue?
Aye.
Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Councilmember Pats?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Medina?
Aye.
And Mayor Bowders.
Aye. The ordinance is approved at first reading. Department head reports. Planning Director's report, 13.1. Charlie.
Yes, this is my monthly report to you on the regular Planning Commission meeting. The Commission held its regular December meeting last Thursday, December 14th. There were 3 items on the agenda. The first was a public hearing on approval of the final development plan for the public park and open space at the Sherwin-Williams project. The Commission approved that FDP unanimously, 7-0. They did make one change to the conditions, which was they required there will be a regulation size half basketball court. They required it to be rotated in a clockwise direction so that people shooting baskets would have their backs to the sun. They also discussed the issue of the trees on, the hackberry trees on Sherwin Avenue, and they did vote unanimously to include a tree removal permit for those trees. So they did approve the removal of those trees. They discussed it, and they said that that's what they wanted to do. So just letting you know. Then they had 2 study sessions. One was on the Ocean Avenue townhomes at 1270 Ocean Avenue. That's a 3-unit project. And because it results in the demolition of an existing residential unit, it also requires City Council approval. We have scheduled a study session for you on that project. I believe it's at your next meeting on January 16th. And then that will be coming back to the Commission and the Council for consideration of approval. And then finally, they considered the update of the noise ordinance. They did express concerns about the feasibility of enforcement of those provisions. And that will also be coming to you, not as a study session, but as an agenda item under action items at your next meeting on January 16th. I would note that the one decision that they made on Sherwin-Williams is appealable within 15 days. The appeal deadline is next Friday, December 29th, and if the the council wishes to appeal that yourselves, that is, call it for review, this would be your opportunity to do that. And that concludes my report. I'd be happy to respond to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Charlie. Do members have questions or comments for Charlie? Seeing and hearing none, we move past item 13.1. Future agenda item requests from council members. Does anyone have an item for tonight? Member Donahue?
Mayor Bowders,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. There was another part to my report I forgot to say.
We'll let you go back to 13.1.
Which is that there will be a special meeting of the Planning Commission tomorrow. And that will be to consider 3 applications for cannabis manufacturers. There is a 15-day appeal period of those decisions, whatever the Commission's decisions may be tomorrow night. And of course, there's no City Council meeting within that 15-day period, so I will be sending you all an email after the Planning Commission meeting to let you know what they did.
Thank you, Charlie. Any questions on that? No. Future agenda items, Member Donahue.
I've been sitting on a regional committee that has to do with the closure of Alta Bates Hospital. The hospital has been talked about that it could be eliminated and one of our local emergency rooms closed. There's been a lot of regional people concerned that the time to get to an emergency room has effectively been increased, which has a health consequence. Nancy Skinner proposed something, a Senate bill that the Assembly and the Senate passed to have a kind of regulation of the amount of time that is growing between emergency rooms happening statewide. And the governor vetoed it. And what I'd like to have an agenda item on is to contribute to a study that would look into this issue, that would better document what the health consequences are. The governor, I believe, and just couldn't see definitive, as an implication. But if this study were to be completed, and the city of Berkeley is ponying up $25,000 for the study, and they're asking the other regional cities who would be affected, their populations affected by the closure of this emergency room, to participate in this study. And I would like us to have as an agenda item this possibility of us contributing $5,000 to this regional study.
Thank you, Member Donahue. Do members support asking us to come back to discuss $5,000 contribution to the study for Alta Bates?
I do.
I do as well.
Member Pats?
I'm always up for discussion.
Okay. City Manager, this is something that in terms of staff time and energy would be very easy to bring forward?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. I support as well. So you have a majority of support for that request.
We're planning on January 16th.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Member Donahue, for your work on the Alta Bates Coalition Group. I appreciate that. I believe Member Martinez had an item.
I do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This doesn't yet rise to the level of discussion at council, but Mayor Bowders and I have discussed the possibility of becoming a sister city, and I would like council support to direct staff to have initial conversations with the mayor and myself offline to discuss whether that's a possibility.
Is there any objection to that request? Is there support for it? Yes, yes.
Yes.
So we'll have an ad hoc committee to discuss the inquiry Member Martinez has raised with you. Do you have any future agenda items over here?
I do not.
No. Member Pats? No? I have none. That's the end of that item. The time is 8:41. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.